keep this closer. Better? Okay, so I'm going to try to do a couple of things. I'm so used to moving when I'm talking, but I guess I will try and stay here. So again, welcome everyone to the workshop, the Sustainable Regional Systems Workshop on the Convergent Sea Level Adaptation for Urban and Rural Systems in the Gulf of Mexico coastal regions. We are very glad and happy that you join us today. And I especially thank our guests and panelists and all participants who needed to travel to come and join us. And hopefully that will be a worthwhile experience for all of us. And I strongly believe so. We have a full and curious agenda today, and a lot of individuals with different backgrounds from different regions. So it will be fun. This first workshop is was made possible thanks to funds from an National Science Foundation award, and then other resources such as logistics, operational, and organizational is provided by the University of Miami's College of Engineering and Florida A&M University / Florida State University Resilient Infrastructure and Disaster Response Center. I got it right, Will? Okay. Thank you. Again, thank you. Let me just start by talking about the goals of the workshop, and hopefully that will motivate the rest of the day. And well, if we were to put this in bullet item, the first thing is to bring together diverse perspectives, different backgrounds and regions to build a network and community of practice and research on sustainable regional systems with a special focus on sea level rise. And if we were to ask, why do we want to do such a thing? And basically, we would like to achieve convergence on understanding the challenges about the problem at hand. And when we talk about convergence, we're not talking about converging to a point, or converging to a well-connected and defined network. And why do we want to do that? Because we would like to have the big picture, to be able to see the big picture and to develop a shared language on the practice of research of this topic. And the important thing is developing the language, not to adopt a certain language or impose a certain language or absorb by a certain language, but develop a language that all of us can understand and communicate each other. And to be able to basically talk about the multiple dimensions and facets of this problem. It's such an interesting phenomena that this is not a laboratory science per se. You develop a know-how in a very well-defined within the very well-defined boundaries. This is the kind of science that can work if everyone participates and coordinates and contribute. And that is why it's important to talk this language, to be able to explore or identify pathways to put this know-how in action in an integrated fashion, because the science is advancing and it will continue to advance. So we are going to produce or develop solutions to challenging problems. But the main challenge is to how do you make them working? How do you bring the parts together so the machine works in harmony and perform the way it is supposed to perform? And this is a big challenge. And when we read about it, we hear about it, we observe that, especially in our context. And to be able to, of course, to explore these pathways, we need to talk about vertical coordination. We need to talk about horizontal coordination. We need to talk about diagonal, all kind of other coordinations. And vertical coordination is maybe bridging the gap between the communities all the way to policymakers and regional planners, and whatever happens in between. Actually, we need to identify and learn about whatever happens in between so that we can put perspective into our science and discussion and even implementation. And horizontal coordination is now this is the coordination across regions and across communities where across the rural and urban continuum. And actually, what is that? How do we define rural in the 21st century? And how can we identify the interconnectedness, interdependence? How is this going to play out in finding solutions? And how can we actually use this to create synergy? And you can continue with those questions. Actually, having said that, one of the purposes of the workshop is not to find answers to questions, but to come up with the relevant questions. And then anything like the coordination between solutions, which it can be a solution, right? Adaptation is a solution, but usually there's no one formula fits all. Usually a solution is a combination of things. How do you coordinate them? How do you coordinate the infrastructure, the energy infrastructure, with the transportation infrastructure, and all others that you can think of? So the idea is eventually we come to think more deeper about moving from line defense to territorial defense and immersive. So that is, in a nutshell, just the context and the scope of this workshop. And that scope is also subject to change. So in other words, because this is what we're here, we want to learn from each other. Before going to the structure of the workshop and introducing our next speakers and panelists, I would like to recognize a couple of individuals here. And first, I would like to recognize my colleagues who were basically leading this, this effort of building the capacity and for a network as the co-PIs or PIs of the National Science Foundation Award, and Rusty Fagan from Texas A&M, and Sabaritanam Kameshwar, just sitting right next to him, from Louisiana State University. I don't know if Catherine Mack is here, not yet. I is again from University of Miami, and Diana Mitsowa, we're there from Florida Atlantic University. And of course, I have to recognize, and because of our gratitude to the organization committee that really work hard, have meetings every week to organize the panels and identifying the panelists, and everything is pretty much behind the scene. And that committee is Lamis back there, is a PhD student at the University of Miami, Department of Industrial Engineering, Dr. Esper Underoğlu from Civil and Architectural Engineering, Sam Carter from the Resilient Cities Catalyst, Bobby Hill, has always been there from the beginning, from Concordia, and Will, of course, Hill from Ryder Center, and Nina is here, also PhD student from Civil and Architectural Engineering, and last but not least, definitely, Emily Powell from Florida State University. So you might have probably already noticed that they're in alphabetical order. That's the safest order. So having said that, I just want to talk about a couple of things about the workshop structure. You've already received the agenda, which kind of evolved in time. Probably you have quite a few versions of that. And believe me, the one that is active right now is the one. And we were able to finalize it, on Wednesday, with some little changes. We will have 3 panels. The first panel will focus on the community perspective, the second on the planners and policymakers perspective, and the third one on the catalyst. And then we will have lightning talks. And you'll see that our panels are composed of mostly people from not academia. We will have sampling of some academicians there, but most of the people there are practitioners and from stakeholders, because as researchers, I guess from my perspective, we're here to learn and learn from each other and hear different voices. So I think we found that is what the most interesting part for this workshop, for me. Then, of course, we are academicians and researchers. We have to talk too. But thankfully, today we are going to have lightning. We are going to have short So I'm sure they will be bearable. And you will provide a sample of the type of research that all of us should, because again, this is a part of an effort to building a network. And hence that we need to know about the components, the nodes of that network, and that will give us a good opportunity of what is the the background and the research, active research going on in that fashion. Now you can you see those websites and links for the workshop agenda and panelist bios, and you should also have these QR codes, on your tables, so you can always use them to access anytime to the workshop agenda and the bios of our esteemed panelists. Now, just very quickly, again, as I said, the first panel is on operationalizing decision-making for community resilience, and will be moderated by Stephen Bingler from Concordia. The second one, and he will later introduce the panelists. The second one is the Connecting Regional All Hazards Resilience Action to Support Coastal Resilience in Gulf of Mexico. And that is our late morning panel, will be moderated by Emily Powell. And the first panel of the afternoon and the third panel of the workshop will be on bridging the gap between communities and policymaking for resilience. So we are here in the vertical integration as well. We will talk about within each panel about the horizontal coordination as well. So that's what I call this. I like that term, catalyst, right? So basically to bridging this gap. Now, before I stop, I would like to give some special thanks and also recognize the great help, and especially in logistics, that we received from the University of Miami College of Engineering staff. That's our first example today to put know-how into public action, because this all organization planning will be nothing if they did not, provide all this, help to us. They made my life much easier than literally. I mean, they basically help us to move the parts that otherwise would not move. And of course, all these resources were made available to us by Dean Biswas, the College of Engineering, and he was supportive of this from the beginning, and we really appreciate and grateful to him about this. And of course, this topic, this area is not strange to him. Actually, his whole career is related to resilience and sustainability. And he's very, he was very kind to accept our invitation to join us today and participate in the opening remarks part. And as I told you, that he's not really unfamiliar with this topic. He's on the he spent a career on similar topics. He's a faculty member in the Department of Chemical, Environmental, and Materials Engineering, with an affiliated appointment in the Los Angeles School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences. And he is a pioneer in this field, recognized for applying aerosol science and engineering to multiple areas, such as energy, environmental nanotechnology, solar energy, air pollution control, medicine, among others. He's a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and a member of the National Academy of Engineering. If any of this was wrong, just correct me. And I would like to, it's my great pleasure to invite him to podium to address our attendance. Great.
Thank you, Murad. So good morning, everyone, and a big welcome to Miami and the University of Miami, and specifically the College of Engineering, right? So I'm relatively new compared to all our experts here who have been putting this event together, but I'll give you a brief overview where the college is headed. And it's a very exciting time for us. And thank you all for coming here and really participating with us, because there's a lot to learn. And I'm sure my colleagues will bring this knowledge back for us to, of course, guide us as we continue to grow here in Miami and the University of Miami. I would also like to thank all our out-of-town visitors. And of course, you'll be very busy doing exciting stuff today, but do take the opportunity to experience our good weather and a beautiful campus, right? Even at the lunch break, take a little walk and enjoy the beautiful campus. We also have, at least I see one of our alums, I'm sure some more are alums, and head of our Dean's Advisory Council, Alan Sirkin is here. He's a practitioner. We were just chatting. He tells me he's personally very interested. His house is right on the edge of the ocean. Beautiful view, of course, but have to ensure that the view can continue. So thank you, Alan, for joining us. The Dean's Advisory Council is a big supporter of our activities. The college is a young one compared to many other universities, but we turned 75 this year. And we had a series of workshops. Prior to my joining here, I engaged with the faculty and we came up with strategic initiatives. I like the theme of the workshop, which is put out in a very multidisciplinary fashion, which is so much needed in tackling some of the global challenges we face. So the College of Engineering faculty, of course, we have 6 different departments, but we all got together and came up with certain strategic directions. I'll just rattle off the names. One is in health engineering, the other is in data sciences and engineering, advanced materials. Being in Florida, we also want to go out to outer space, so space sciences and engineering. And then sustainability and resilience and energy and environment. So with these 6 areas, and you can clearly see that there's an overlap and we all work together from different disciplines, not only within engineering, but also reach out to other schools and colleges on campus and the government sector, NGOs, and even the corporate sector, right? So with this, and there are certain cross-cutting initiatives. We are at a university. The pandemic has taught us many things, given us different experiences. So we have learned how to innovate in how we train our students. And I'll just briefly allude to that in the educational sector, an international connection beyond the university, beyond the region and the country, connecting to different leading universities across the globe. And we are at a sort of hub for both Latin America, South America, the Caribbean. So it makes us well poised to do that. And the last thing on innovation and entrepreneurship. We come from an engineering school. Engineers tend to be innovative in the things they do. So with all of this, we are advancing it, and you can clearly see that the areas of sustainability and resilience, energy, environment clearly overlap with what is going to be discussed today. And I'll briefly touch upon them. At the university, we've also created a climate resilience academy, which brings all schools and colleges together to work on this very challenging topic and across, right from what causes climate change to what are the impacts to how do we really tackle them. And maybe this focus is more on the resiliency part here, but that is a key emphasis of the academy. And I see many leaders here. I look at your bios. Again, thank you for joining us. But there is an opening for the executive director of the academy. If anyone is interested, or if you know anyone, do let Murat know, or feel free to even send me an email. I'm actually chairing that committee, search committee. So things are very exciting here as we continue to grow. Looking at this topic, of course, Murat has given a wonderful description and also laid out the format, so I won't go into that. But I specifically like this multidisciplinary approach, not only among faculty colleagues, but pulling societal folks in, NGOs in, and that is extremely critical for us to come up with, of course, even understanding the problem and coming up with relevant solutions. At the end of the day, we want to come up with relevant solutions. I know that the focus is on the sea level rise, a very important effect which is happening. In Miami, if you look across the nation, there are certain parts who might even question Is there climate change happening? What are the impacts? Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty, but in this region, I think it's well understood. We experience it. So the challenge is we have the support. So I would really encourage you to work together to come up with appropriate solutions. But I would also like you to think, which is probably not the emphasis today, is to think even beyond what are the dotted lines or even solid lines, because this group could make an impact there. So I am a advanced technology person. He mentioned I use nanoparticle technology, maybe to address the carbon dioxide issue, but we want to learn from you, right? The actual connecting all the arrows. So what information can be provided to the upstream folks, maybe to the downstream folks, to really holistically tackle this problem? It's extremely challenging, and we need to all work together to do that. So there are going to be many take-home messages, I hope, and I will look forward to your report. I'm sure there'll be a nice report from this workshop that we can even share with the others, and definitely with our Climate and Resilience Academy members. I just want to mention, at a university, you also, my hair is gray, but we bump into young folks. That's our main client here, and that keeps us young. We need to also keep them excited, because they are the future workforce that is going to tackle these problems. So in the College of Engineering, we have revamped how we even educate our students. They come in very well prepared now, very aware. They can write apps, they can do all kinds of things. They are experts in social media connectivity. How do we train them more effectively? So we've launched a series of first-year courses. One is called Global Challenges Addressed by Engineering and Technology. While it's in that title, but the societal connection is very deep. Faculty from each department come and teach them. They work in teams. And climate issues are always one of the topics that are covered, including solutions to maybe sea level rise. It's very interesting to see a first-year student propose solutions. Many of our faculty initially felt, oh, they don't have the background. Yes, that's true. They have to pick up the fundamental knowledge, which is so critical, but it's amazing to see the solutions they come up with. The other course is on digital solutions of the future. You might be knowing where AI, machine learning is headed. You might have seen a little program called ChatGPT, which is now so available, right? Instead of reacting and banning these technological innovations, let us learn how to use it. And this group also could definitely benefit by something like that, and definitely climate science and engineering, because of the uncertainty and the complex data sets that we deal with. And the last thing is innovation and entrepreneurship. Right in the first year, we tell our students what is it to be creative. So this workshop meets all those criteria. Maybe next year we take some of these topics, introduce them in these classes. So I would again end here by just welcoming you. I, of course, as a dean, are pulled in all meetings. I wish I could sit here all day, but I look forward to an update from Murat, and hope you have a very good time. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you, DP President, and thank you for your support. And there's all this discussion. Some of the things are even like good refresher for me as a member of College of Engineering. And hopefully by the end of this workshop, we will end up recruiting a director for the Resilience Academy. Let's see how it evolves. I guess without any pause and losing any time, I would like to just introduce the and then I had I don't want that, right? The first panel. The past panel, as I said, is on the operationalizing decision making for community resilience. And before inviting Stephen to introduce the panelists, I just want to say that there's a reason that we call this a workshop, not a symposium or conference or anything like that, because we would like, hope that this will be an interactive event. And yes, we have panelists and they're esteemed, and we are really curious to to hear what they have to say. But we would like to hear from the audience too, and from everyone here. So whenever a question is asked by the moderator to and panelists, and please relay that to you. And it is actually addressed to you too. We would like to know what you think. So there will be not just a Q&A session, but also a discussion. So do not shy away from making comments and sharing your ideas with us in this time permits. Of course, there will be the structural time and the breaks, and we will hopefully have some time for networking too. Okay, so let's not just lose more time. I'm just going to invite Stephen to the podium and to introduce and invite the panelists of our first session. And then Stephen is also from visiting us from Louisiana, as he works for Concordia. Actually, he's a founding partner. Right. All right, Steve. The stage is yours.
Might need your help here.
Sure.
Let me get my glasses, and I might need the help of my glasses. And now with the next thing. You can use the mouse if you want. There we go. Right. Well, thank you, Maura. I'm going to invite all of the panelists to come and sit up at the dais rather than one-on-one, because what I would like to do is to have the panelists introduce themselves. I mean, this is not a top-down workshop, right? So I want to start with that. I'm the moderator, but I'm more of a facilitator. But the first thing I want to do is to thank Dean Bishop for the one word that I heard in his presentation that took me a little bit by surprise. Holistic. I think we're accustomed to solving problems kind of one step at a time. And I think that this workshop is a demonstration of the fact that the problems, the cataclysmic problems of climate change cannot be solved independently. They have to be solved as a complex adaptive system. So we have a panel who is expert in the subject matter, but as Murat said, we have a room full of people who are also experts. What we're going to try to do in this panel is to ask the people in the room to not think of yourself as an expert for this presentation, but to think of yourself as a member of your community. Because we're working with a couple of researchers from Stanford, and they're telling us that that they can demonstrate that 100 people from a diverse background and it can make a better decision than the smartest person in the room. So we're going to play with that a little bit today. But first, before we do anything else, I want to ask our panelists to introduce themselves by way of a question. And the question is, how is your personal experience or the experience of your organization tied to creating answers for these significant issues around sea level rise? First of all, introduce yourself, and then introduce the organization that you represent, and then tell us how you and or your organization are contributing to this larger issue of sea level rise.
So much pressure, right? Can you all hear me okay? Yes. All right, my name is Alexandra Carter. I'm the president and CEO of Desireline LLC. It's a for-profit entity, so I'm kind of an oddball in this room. But I do think this is really relevant. My background is in urban and regional planning. I'm a certified planner, have experience writing codes, implementing policies, running statewide programs for watershed, but also like boots on the ground, issuing permits where sort of the rubber meets the road. Desireline, to your point, Steve, I think if you're not sure what a Desireline is, it's actually a dirt path, right, from one point to another. It's a transportation term mostly used, but ultimately, the idea behind is the fastest point from one way to another, and it's all been ignoring a sidewalk, right? Some other route that you're supposed to take. And I think the mission of our company is really that, right? It's looking at sort of what we're presented with, but then maybe finding solutions that get us where we need to go more quickly, more efficiently, more thoughtfully. And so we work with a lot of communities in project development and grant development and managing their built environment and implementing their plans. And oftentimes they think long-term, and that's great. As a planner, we think comprehensively. But as a company, I think we all know these issues are near and dear and more urgent than ever. And so there's an urgency that we look to facilitate through our services, right? And so from a history of public service and now in the private sector, our work now is focused on supporting communities in their decision-making with that resilience, with the sustainability, backing that all up and really thinking through those processes most efficiently. So thank you so much, Steve. Thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you.
Project team.
Thank you. So I'm Debalina Sengupta. I'm the Texas Sea Grant at Texas A&M University. So if I want to go into all the details of Texas A&M University and the system, it's a huge university system, so I'll keep it to the Sea Grant program. So Sea Grant is a program with National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. It's more than 50 years old, and it exists in 34 coastal and Great Lakes states in the country, so it's a university-based program. There are 4 primary focus areas that we work on: healthy coastal ecosystems, resilient communities and economies, and the sustainable fisheries and agriculture, and then education, workforce development. So I serve on the Texas Sea Grant as the Coastal Resilience Program Director. Our work is primarily focused in the 23 coastal counties in Texas, so I'm connected to the coastal communities and trying to bring science, technology, engineering, and math to those coastal communities, doing meaningful research as well as implementation projects in those counties. Stephen talked about different diverse backgrounds. So by training, I'll just move a little bit over to my career as a chemical engineer. I also represent the American Institute of Chemical Engineers in different roles, but one of the things that I've been involved in there is I started the energy transition topical for the oldest fuels and petrochemicals division there. So working at the intersection of sustainability resilience for some of the existing energy industry in that space. So have had a great experience in sustainability and resilience, but mostly trying to focus on how do we transition from what we have now to what we want in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Olivia Collins. I'm the Senior Director of Programs for the CLEO Institute. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization based in Miami, but we work across the state of Florida. And we're focused on climate education, engagement, and advocacy. So we have a very bottom-up, top-down approach to the work that we do. And by that, I mean that we focus heavily on community engagement, especially those that are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. So our youth, women, LMI communities, historically marginalized community members, communities of color, ALICE community members. ALICE stands for limited income constrained but employed. So these are folks that have jobs that are still at or below the poverty line. So basically, people who've contributed the least to the climate crisis, but who stand to lose the most and are already really feeling the impacts. So what we try and do is help them connect the dots on climate through education, but also empower them with tools, capacity building, trainings, so that they can use the power of their voice, so they can have a seat at the decision-making table. And to do that, we also have to work with our tops. So we work closely with municipal partners, elected officials, our large utilities, making sure that they're prioritizing climate in their policy agenda, but that they're also prioritizing those community members in their agenda as well, that they're considering their needs, that they're making space for them at the decision-making table. As our founder likes to say, we're not just providing a seat at the table, but we're bringing the table to the community. So it's important to make that space, to reduce the barriers of access for folks that are really busy surviving, especially in an area like Miami, where the scope of vulnerability is huge. 50% of our residents are considered ALICE. You can find that report at United Way. They release it every year. And so ultimately what CLEO is trying to do in conjunction with all of our partnerships and collaborations with folks like and Kilan is move the needle on climate policy, but make sure that's being done in a just way, that it's incorporating the needs and the voice of our most vulnerable community members.
Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Kilan Bishop. I am a postdoctoral researcher here at the University of Miami. I also went to graduate school here. And it was during graduate school that I realized that in order for me to have community, I was not going to be able to exist solely at this university. Plenty of the conversations, events, and just my day-to-day life as a researcher were dominated by people who had different and diverse perspectives. What I was lacking was shared experiences. And so I started to look for a community outside of the walls of the university. And where I found that was among folks like Carolyn Lewis, the founder of the CLEO Institute, among folks that were doing advocacy and outreach and community engagement work, not as a side hustle, as their full-time endeavor. And whereas I was very passionate about health equity and cancer, they were very passionate about our changing climate and the changes that were very rapidly happening in the city. And that is how I, as a cancer biologist, ended up in climate conversations and resilience conversations. A legislative advisory board that was formed in the city of Miami, called at the time, the City of Miami's Sea Level Rise Committee. I was like a third-year graduate student talking to a friend of mine who was the director of a nonprofit organization, and he was telling me like, hey, I need your resume. I'm like, for what? You don't need my resume for anything you're doing. He was like, no, I need your resume. We are seeking representation on this body, and we would not put a community member in that room. We don't think that they would have a necessarily positive experience, but you know how to traverse rooms like that. So we want you or someone like you, someone with your expertise, someone who can span the boundaries of academia and politics and respectability, but also of community voices. And that is literally how I got into this. I served on the what is now the Climate Resilience Committee. It shifted in scope during my tenure for about 4 years. And then I stepped back from that because what I wanted to do was re-relate to the work as a researcher. As passionate as I am about community work and engagement, like little Kilan wanted to be a scientist, and I wanted to get back to that. So at this point, I have a growing research portfolio on social and structural barriers to health, which includes those imposed by climate change and cancer health equity. And it's been interesting because the methodology that I adopt now and the research questions that I ask are directly informed by time that I spent just interfacing with community, elevating their concerns, understanding more of the grassroots approach to the work. And when I was able to step back and use that to inform research questions, it definitely made me a much better researcher.
All right, thank you. We have an amazing team of experts. As I mentioned earlier, everyone at this table has expertise and represents an organization. But in addition to that, every person in this room is a member of a community. And we participate in our communities differently than we participate in these kinds of events. our interest is to try to figure out how to bring all of those pieces together, because sometimes the answers might be to this was referenced in the nanoparticles. So each one of us is a nanoparticle, and we all come together, and we make something happen that's independent, or that is where the whole is greater than the sum of its nanoparticles. Then we would call that a self-organizing system, I think. And so I would like for us to be thinking about this workshop, at least this session, as a self-organizing system. So it's a little scary, risky to think of it that way, but we're going to give it a shot. And the reason is because I think I hate to say this, but because we're all tired of hearing the Einstein quote about if you do things the same way you've done them, you always get the same thing you always got. But we really do have to get out of the linear sequential way of solving problems, and we have to get into this more organic and complex adaptive, because we're dealing with nature. Nature is a complex adaptive system, so we have to approach it from we believe that we have to approach it that way. And the bottom line is, all of us are smarter than any of us. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask you to take out your cell phone, and I'm going to ask you to either point your phone at that QR code, or go to Mentimeter, and dial in that number. And then we're going to be able to hear from everybody in this room, right? Independently from what we're hearing from the folks on the dais. So what we're going to do is I'm not going to be the conductor up here with the baton, like in classical music. We're going to have a little jazz going. So everybody's going to play a different instrument, and then we're going to pull all those instruments together, and we're going to make some kind of, maybe it's just going to be noise. First time everybody plays together, it's going to sound like noise. We'll try to get a little music out of it by the end of the session. But the most important thing is we're going to get a lot of different perspectives. So is there anyone who hasn't linked in yet? I'm going to leave this up there. You need it a little longer, or is everybody in? Okay. So now at this point, you are connected to this presentation. Pardon me? Oh, sorry.
What's it supposed to look like? That's all I. It's supposed to look like the screen.
It's supposed to look like that screen. Now it looks like that.
Oh.
So we're going to do a little test. Let's make sure we all know how to work our little cell phones here, okay? I'm going to ask everybody to give us a weigh in on, tell us what kind of mood you're in right now. Are you tired and grumpy? It's early in the morning. Hopefully everybody had a good night's sleep. Are you curious and open-minded? Or are you trying to, or you really want to ask, what do we have in lunch? Good. I was kind of hoping for that. So now at least we know our departure point, where most of us are curious. I'm not going to ask who the grumpy ones are. That's going to come out in the works. So the first question of the panelists were, who are you and what is your organization doing to address this issue of sea level rise? Question number 2 is in the category of how can we define community challenges around sea level rise? Now, first, I'm going to ask our panelists to weigh in on the first 2 questions, A and B. And then after that, we're going to go through this exercise we just went through, and I'm going to ask the audience, the participants, to weigh in on the next 3 questions. And the way I'm going to do this, I'm not going to take my baton and point it at Alex and say, Alex, why don't you talk now? What I'd rather do is kind of do it like Jeopardy, right? All right, we have a question. Now, hit your buzzer if you want to answer that question. And you're going to get a lot of points. So we don't have any money. But we're going to give you a lot of points if you get the best answer. So at this stage of the game, who would like to take on the question of how do you define community resilience? Who would like to take that on first? Okay, awesome.
So, The concept of resilience is very huge and vast, and the way I break it down is technological resilience, community resilience, and ecological resilience. So how does the ecology get back? How does the community get back? So in terms of community resilience, what I have experienced as an engineer, worked in engineering and talked with engineers all my life. For the past 3 years, I've been working with communities, and they have the research challenges and the problems that we need to work on. So if you look at the NSF definition of the convergence, it is looking at those problems that are real and communities' problems, and how do we work backwards instead of trying to find that certain angle at which your thing will refract or whatnot. But that's where I think our community-based research should be focused on, is what are the major or even minor challenges that communities face, and how can we work backwards towards defining our research questions from what the community needs are. So I don't know if it answers the question, but that's the perspective that I think we should have for community-based research perspectives.
Thank you. Who's next?
So at CLEO, we look at climate from a really interdisciplinary perspective. We're science-based, but we're also community-based. And if I were to be really succinct, I would say community resilience is preparing our community for what is happening now and in the future, but making sure that our community is thriving and not just surviving climate change.
Sure, and I would just add, I don't know if we're already on feed, but
We can just do them both.
all right, awesome. I completely agree about defining research questions based on what community challenges are, but community-based research is more than that. It's integrating community at every stage of the research process. So in qualitative research, when you are interviewing folks, you're collecting perspectives. If you use a methodology called grounded theory, you're going back to that information constantly, and you're shifting the questions that you may ask. Your interview guide that you submitted is a working, living document. And community-based research also has to be that, because the needs of community and the concerns of community often shift quicker than we can answer a research question comprehensively and report back to our funders or grant partners or whatever the case may be. And so community-based research should be defined by not only that adaptability, but also the ability to advance some type of action that actually addresses the concern. Community is not just curious, community is being impacted. And so if your research is just curious, probably not community-based. Community-based research should be defined by the ability to act on it.
Nice.
I think everybody has a really great perspective on this. And mine kind of comes from working within emergency operations centers, right? So it's like the very, very people oriented and political oriented side of it. So when I think about resilience, I understand the different levels, but I think decision makers, right, think about how quickly they can get back after a storm. So plans think proactively about how quickly they can get back after they're hit by a major disaster. And people, community research, I think y'all are all saying what I think I agree with, right? But the community speaks about this totally differently, right? So for them, it's bars, grocery stores, and gas stations and electricity, right? That's how they think about resilience. How quickly can I get food, a drink, at least in Louisiana. Sorry,
I think
Louisiana, it's like
Louisiana drink first.
But that's not how we, I think as a academic or as a practitioner or a planner, we have to build that language into our community research. You have to build in that appreciation for the immediate, knee-jerk reaction that people want to see, when you're reacting or preparing for a disaster. That perspective is so important. And I think to what y'all are saying, community research to me is is that, right? It's like remembering that you're human, right? And everybody else around you are human beings first. And remembering that, what makes you appreciate the ecosystem, what makes you appreciate your job, right? So that you can think about resilience in ecology or biology, right? And you can think about it in an economic fashion. So translating what we know into those lived experiences so people can understand what we're saying in our plans and our policies and decision-making process, both before and after an event when so many decisions are made. And there's so much opportunity like in that window right after an event. So yeah.
Thank you so much. And especially thank you for reminding us that we're human beings first. There were three planning processes in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. The first two were conducted by experts. The third one was conducted by the community. And I think we do have to remind ourselves that expertise is not the only solution. So that's to the point that I'm making now is that in the next series of questions, I'm asking you to not answer those questions as an expert. I'm asking you to answer those questions as a member of your community. You live somewhere, you have a family, or you have a relationship to family. You have friends, you have clubs, so don't think of yourself as an academic or a practitioner. Answer this question, if you don't mind, from the point of view as a member of your community.
Whether we agree with it or not.
So this tool is ranking dangers.
Well, I think the question is it the community perspective or their individual? Right, that's my question.
Right.
It's the community perspective.
It's the community.
Okay.
In the community that you live in, is the community you live in concerned about sea level?
Selecting more than one option, it's the same question. Why did you select more than one option?
You're right.
You mean,
You're right.
Like one person can choose all three. That's what I was asking.
I think you can do one.
Maybe the community is so homogeneous, like some are.
Well, that's kind of shocking, don't you think, that the majority of communities are not all that concerned about sea level rise? But it might just be that you live up on higher ground. Maybe you're in a community that's up on the hill and what you worry? So that's somebody else's problem.
Stephen, that is also a problem because communities at risk move into these higher level grounds.
Yes.
So and that's where it becomes an issue for the communities that are taking it.
Yes. Migration. Yes.
Or the essential services maybe in the lower ground and the high ground community doesn't know that.
It would be interesting if we had this question about not just sea level rise, but all shocks and stress. Here's another question. Does your community call the challenges by a different name? I'll tell you, I stood on a dock in South Louisiana with a fisherman, and we looked out over the water, and he said, "You see all that water out there? That used to 10 years ago when I was a kid, that was marsh." And I said, "I know because of climate change." And he said, "No, we don't have climate change. We don't have climate change." So everybody has a different word, right, for how we describe. And so we're going to do a little wordle here, right? And we're going to see how many different ways there are to describe climate change from the position of the community. The bigger the words means the more people who chose that word. It means that it's a duplicate. Now flooding is one of the. Yeah, flooding is kind of normal. See, it's not too shocking. Been having flooding for a long time. Maybe it's not such a big deal. If we call it flooding. Very interesting. Look how many different names there are. All right, let's move on to the next, third question in this series. What are the gaps in perception among the communities, planners, and policymakers about what resilience means?
Can I answer that question?
Yes.
I I need a microphone, but. So in my experience,
Everybody else answered on.
not an expert, but I've been in Miami for 7 years and I've worked at CLEO for just about 6 years. And so what I do know is the truth that I know and the communities that I've had the privilege of working with. The word resilience is obviously used as a buzzword now, especially at the state level. And there's been a huge focus on infrastructure, physical gray infrastructure when it comes to resilience. And I think our policymakers have forgotten about our human infrastructure. And in doing so, have created policies that are damaging short-term, long-term. So for example, USACE, the United States Army Corps of Engineers, thank you, proposed a $5 billion project in Miami, which was to help reduce storm surge. The project was essentially, in a nutshell, a giant wall, and they use a cost-benefit analysis. So that obviously favored properties that were much higher value. So the unintended consequences were going to be that lower value properties and communities downstream were going to be impacted by this giant wall that was going to protect a select few. And they didn't even consider things like what are nature-based solutions that we could put inside of this program to help the community be better, have better resilience over time. So I do think that in policymaking, for whatever reason, whether it's politicking or people who are going to be running for president soon, whatever the case may be, they use resilience as a way to make themselves look very environmental. But then what they're talking about are seawalls, and we do need to adapt. So we do need that kind of infrastructure. But again, if we forget about people infrastructure, then we won't have any cities. People are the ones that make up the economy. They're the ones who make up thriving communities that we live in. We can't have businesses without people. You know, we can have a planet without people, but when we talk about community resilience, I think it's important to remember and to push our policymakers, especially at the local and state level, to think about the human infrastructure component as opposed to physical infrastructure component.
Thank you. All right, so here we are. Education, lack of education, we're the top two contenders, but we'll be going back later and looking at all of these other words that came up in this little mini research project. Yes.
The previous question, I was just curious, what the panelists, how they saw their committees defined.
Okay. Oh, that's a great question. How the panelists as an expert, speaking as an
That about like gas stations, bars, grocery stores, I'm just curious, and could we hear what the rest?
A long description or just a word, like we did?
I'll just do the
They should be.
We call it more intense and frequent rainfall events. Like, we couldn't use more words today, but more intense and more frequent rainfall events. We don't even call them hurricanes anymore because sometimes just bad rainstorms and we're flooding. So it's absurd, but that's what we do.
Anybody else have that? No? All right, well, let's move on. We got two more questions. The broad category of this question is, how can we co-create a process of authentic engagement and trust over time? That's a big question, huh? But we have the experts here about how to do that, right?
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. So how can we understand the actual needs of the communities we serve in the context of sea level rise? And what mechanisms do you need to create to facilitate communities in communicating those perspectives?
But I'll probably take it.
Jump in here.
So I'll talk a little bit. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, oh, they're close.
So the Sea Grant network has existed for over 50 years now. So that continuity with engagement with communities is very important. And the way we operate is that we have our extension agents living and working in the communities with the county commissioners, with the city managers, with the people on the ground. So boots on the ground, that's a term that you used. And that's where we also have that sort of network for our agri-life agents throughout the state of Texas. And I'm sure there are other university systems that have that extension component. But what we are able to do with these extension models is that we have people on the ground in these communities living and learning from them, taking it back to our research communities, giving us the research questions and problems. And that's an engagement that I think the universities and university systems really have the advantage that is not exploited to the fullest that I can bring to the table. Because there you are able to connect the researchers to the extension folks who are in turn connected with the communities. And that creates that like cycle of learning and co-creating something. So I'll also talk about one of the projects that we have been funded over the last year, where we work with our community, like county agents. Whenever a proposal call comes out, we don't go to our researchers first. I go to my county agents first that, hey, there is a proposal call out like this. Do you have a problem that we can work on? So they gave me a problem in the city, Calhoun County in Texas, city of Port Lavaca. They said, hey, we want stormwater drainage systems updated. Can you help? So that's where we had that community problem. We proposed to have actual equipment put on the ground in the communities, not in our labs or anywhere else. And then tie that to a research problem that integrates AI, that integrates GIS systems, that integrates whatnot. And once you are doing that, that is really like giving something to the community as a living lab. And then using the community, the community members are excited about it, put it on the ground. So they have researchers coming in. And this is something a city of Port Lavaca is what, 15,000 people or even less in some areas in the county. So if you are really interested in doing something, co-create, bring them in at the beginning of the process, and then try to find a solution through that. Now, I don't know if we're going to get funded, but that's something that I'm very proud of, because once we have created that, then we can use it in different areas as a project, as a proposal. And again, I come from the academic field, so I'm going to talk about proposals and projects and research a lot, but that's how we can tie and co-create that is sustaining that community, but also helping them gain the visibility that they are putting things together, and not us as researchers who are pushing our solutions down to them.
Thank you.
Does anyone in this room truly understand how little we have as academics to offer, like the day-to-day person? Like authentic engagement and trust over time. Like, do you understand that we have nothing? And I hate to say it, but like, we have so little to offer to someone who is trying to survive. Academia and the way that we conduct research is extractive. We invite people to be guests in conversation, and then when our project is done, those invitations stop. We can contract organizations, like the most we can offer, like, hey, would you like some money to help us advance our purposes? But like, you don't know how things are gonna go. So like the result may or may not help you in the work that you're doing, or like to advance the livelihood of your members. Like, I have this question in advance and I've been struggling with it for a solid week, because until we recreate the way that we do research, there is no co-creation of authentic engagement. Our engagement is not authentic. Academia values research, teaching, and service. That's something I learned as an academic. Because in my day-to-day, I like research, but like I'm not structuring my life. Like how many publications can I get? Like maybe how many lives can I affect? Like service is not this thing that I'm doing to like list out on the CV. And so how do we understand the actual needs of communities we serve in the context of sea level rise? No. How do we understand the actual needs of the communities we serve? Period. That's the question mark. Maybe sometimes it relates to sea level rise and maybe sometimes it's not. But you don't go into a community and go, well, I don't want to understand what you're going through as it relates to the thing that I care about. No. When we have a conversation about resilience, the room always looks like this. And this is not meant to be like, I'm not being negative. I'm not trying to discount the work that was put forth to create this space, which is valuable. Every single time the conversation is resilience, it looks like this. I know I can count on one hand how many Black people are going to be in the room. When we have a conversation about something like climate change or climate gentrification, which is the way that a lot of the community here experiences sea level rise, then the demographics change. That barrier has to come down for us to really be able to engage with each other in an authentic way. And sometimes we may not get what we want to get out of it, and we have to be okay with that. We really do. We gotta be able to write up in our end of the year report, like, you know what, we thought we were gonna do X, but we ended up doing Y. And maybe that comes with a letter of support from someone we were genuinely able to help, an organization or something like that, to show that it wasn't exactly a waste of time, but it didn't match up with those initial deliverables that you promised. Because it's just very hard to form a relationship when it's transactional from the beginning.
And I'm a little biased, right? So I'll admit this. I think this is on. I think you're totally right in that there's a constraint in these types of venues, but there are other tools that I think are used to facilitate community engagement. And as a planner, I'm very biased. We do comprehensive planning, right? So I think that is a tool in terms of how you understand the needs of a community. It includes extensive outreach and engagement where you speak about current infrastructure, planned infrastructure growth over the next 20, 30, 40 years. Communities do this across the country. Planners facilitated, outreach specialists facilitated. It's built upon data and science, and those plans are getting better because they're relying more on models and they're incorporating resilience, sustainability. And these are oriented to the community, right? Where you're taking data, sort of develop a community profile, and then you go to the community and you engage with, this is what we know, but what do you think about your community? And what do you think how should it improve? And it's not narrow to one thing. A comprehensive plan looks at everything comprehensively. So there's nothing that's off the table in terms of what could be discussed, be it education, flood risk, more intense frequent rainfall events, right? i.e. climate change. And so I think when we talk about it from an academic perspective, you have to remember that this is interdisciplinary, right? That everybody brings something different to the table. And that there's multiple jobs and multiple layers to making science actionable and the research that everyone in this room does actionable. But it is difficult to translate that in these community plans. It takes a lot of education, a lot of listening, a lot of patience, a lot of comprehensive plans involve many meetings over time, not just with open community dialogue, but with stakeholder groups having specific interests. And I think that's a tool when you're thinking about regionalism. The first step is like, who has a community comprehensive plan? What does it say in that comprehensive plan? More and more, these plans have capital improvement plans. So they don't just talk about development over the next 20, 35 years. Your coastal, it's going to look at sea level rise, it's going to speak to community perspectives. Not only is it speaking to those perspectives in the long-term vision of that community, but more now than ever, because there's lots of programs available to fund projects, those projects are stronger if they're in your comprehensive plan. So the federal government has taken steps, and so have states, to more proactively say, if you're doing a plan, make sure you have a capital improvement plan tied to it. So there are ways to know, what communities are saying. I think we always have to push for more accessibility of information, more inclusiveness, more equitable engagement processes. And that field is, I think, to y'all's credit, becoming better and better, because we need more advocacy in these groups where they're under employed, or we need support to be in these spaces, right? But I think too, when we talk about mechanisms to get their perspectives, I think y'all are also speaking to this, where the trust has to be built over time. There's got to be that human element, but I think more and more people want to see more data, right? They don't want to just talk about things. They need solutions brought to them, need options to choose from, and they need to be told, if I choose X, Y, and Z, what are the consequences of those decisions, right? So there's more work that needs to be done today than there was 10 years ago, because the decisions are more difficult. And I think we're all hard pressed to sort of project what those options look like. And especially when it comes to sea level rise, to help inform active decision making that will have to occur over many years. This isn't just one decision in one room. It's a vision that has to be implemented with many, many people on board with that vision. But from a regional perspective, I think, we saw this work in Louisiana with the watershed initiative, where the first step in large watershed management was pulling those comprehensive plans first, and then thinking about how you develop a comprehensive plan for a whole region that includes a project list, that addresses sea level rise, that incorporates those community perspectives, and where you have sort of rub points, right? Where you can see one community's plan is definitely not in alignment with a neighboring community plan. Like, clearly that's where you need to spend some time, right? You need to figure out how to bridge those gaps, how to make sure those two communities are working together. And that's where you spend your effort in your regional system, is those rub points where you can clearly see this isn't going to work unless we spend more time with these individuals and understand their differences and hear their perspective. And so I think sometimes we have to, in order to address the timeliness of things, use the tools we have, make them better, right? Make them better. But then think about how we leverage those for these regional systems to encourage more sustainable decision making and management of our waterways.
I want to just for a second, I want to comment on the last two responses, two expert responses.
Yeah.
Very, very different. I mean, I'm an urban planner, so I learned what a comprehensive plan is. I know the list. But I think what Kilan Ashad is asking us is, what do we mean by comprehensive?
Right.
Right? I'm not sure that the kind of comprehensive plan that urban planners are trained with has much of anything to do with the kinds of plans that we will be developing in the future to protect literally hundreds of millions of people's lives and livelihoods. So, and who should be at the table? Who's doing the plan, right? Is it a comprehensive group of people that are doing the plan? Or is it the experts? So I'm going to stop for a minute. I just had to put a pin on that front. Oops. I'm sorry. Other comments?
I'll probably comment on the part, what can we do? And I'm going to look at Dr. Biswas and request him as the Dean of College of Engineering to encourage more engineers to be part of these processes. I never knew what Texas GLO does before I came in a year ago. I had no idea what Texas Water Development Board did a year ago. And now I know that they are doing a lot of these things. They have these, GLO has 4 regions along the coast. Encourage your faculty to go to those sessions. It's free. You can go sit in. It's not a lot of time commitment, maybe an hour or two, but once you go into the communities and these like targeted actions that are happening, you come back with a ton of research questions and you know what the community needs are. And that's also a way where you're going without an agenda, where you're not just asking. I have been asked to provide so many support letters and I turned down so many faculty that no, you don't understand that you need to have that long-term engagement and go in without an agenda. That's what our communication specialist always uses. Don't go into a community with an agenda of pushing your research. Go there, listen to them, understand what the needs are, and then build that level of trust so that you are not going with just fulfilling that tick mark on your NSF project or your NIH project. Go there without an agenda, understand, be a part of the community before you provide a solution or talk with them about it. So I think that's one way that we can really encourage engagement. And I'm talking to Dr. Biswas because I know like he's open to these kind of ideas and being in the field of sustainability and worked with technology for a long time, we have always struggled in the social aspects, and that's how we can probably have a more engaged like presence in the community.
So we have 20 more minutes. Okay, thank you. Let's move on. I want to be sure we have time. Yes,
I don't know if there's a question or answer component, but I really relate to what Ms. Bishop said. I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not a part of an Indigenous community. I'm speaking from my own experience as a minority, both Black and Latina. Working in the realm of Indigenous communities. So when it comes to trust, I think as academics, we already are starting off on a bad foot, especially with Indigenous communities, given the history of colonization of their artifacts and cultural heritage. There is also another perspective too, that how do we even approach Indigenous communities? And this mistrust is also in minority communities as well, where now, for example, we're so focused on making communities resilient, but for example, there are some tribes within the Everglades that don't want their heritage to be saved. Based on their belief system, rising sea levels, for example, is a sign of their creator taking back the heritage of the gift to the creator. So I don't really see even a lot of conversations in terms of how do we better the trust that's already not there because of kind of that colonization theory. And at the same time too, how are we addressing as well when a community does not want certain heritage or certain buildings or even like contested history, negative history that is in the form of a building or monument to be saved. So those are my questions.
thank you so much. I'm going to ask everybody, we're going to get through one more question. I'm going to get through this one real quick, and then we're going to go through one more question, and we're going to have, I want us to have time at the end to kind of jam a little bit, right, as a group, and to deal with these tough questions that come up for all of us to deal with in the question and answers, okay? So we're going to run through quickly and have the participants answer these questions. What keeps folks from engaging in discussions about increasing resilience to sea level rise? Is it too many experts talking over my head? Is it community leaders telling folks that we don't have a problem? Is it decisions that have already been made before the discussion ever started?
Where's working kids?
Yeah.
So I have a job, I don't have kids, but that's actually very accurate, like just at baseline accessibility, like where meetings being held, are there accommodations, but I don't actually have much to say about that, because like I said, I don't have kids. What I picked up this mic to say was very brief. It's actually a little bit of what you said. To what extent are we inviting people to the room to hear what they have to say, but not necessarily to value what they have to say? So like we value empirical evidence and like a learned expertise, but we don't value lived expertise. So an example is there's a lot of data about time to stable housing after Hurricane Katrina. So like people took decades to achieve stable housing, and housing is one of the most studied social determinants of health. If you are not stable in where you are laying your head and like where you are building a life, like several other things are falling through the cracks. And so to what extent if someone walks into the room and says, I and my folks were displaced, we have not been able to achieve a sense of stability that lets us move on with other aspects of our life. Are we gonna go, versus someone comes with the data of like, I did this analysis and talked to 120 residents that were displaced in the aftermath, and I found this to be consistent. Like, we interact with bits and pieces of information very differently depending on who says it. And that is a major reason that people don't want to come into these rooms. Because we don't actually think about what they have to say as a different type of expertise that should be valued. Maybe we do something with it, maybe we don't, maybe we just patronize them and go, oh, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. And then just move on with the conversation as if it wasn't like a life-changing event that they chose to be vulnerable about.
And one of the big culprits, I will add, to that sort of data perspective is philanthropy. So, having said that, throw a little bomb out there. What are the opportunities to alleviate these limitations?
Like the result of this survey.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the question is. What keeps people from engaging in discussions? And what do we do to eliminate those things that keep people from engaging in discussion? Yes.
So Hardy, good morning, everyone. I think the thought on this one specifically, I think, with the conversation that panel had, I'll try and be loud. Oh.
There's a lot to share. I'm so excited about the conversations, but I think what keeps folks not engaged is for us to try to find a way to convert complex conversations into simple English. And I know it sounds very simple because Spanish, as technocrats or bureaucrats or any other crat, I think at the end of the day, if you're looking at the common man on the street, we've got to ask that, you know, when we talk about banking or we talk about money, we talk about health, we talk about insurance, it hurts the pocketbook of those individuals. They get it, they understand it. When you start taking complex conversations like sea level rise, and you know, we are in this setting where you have academics and you have, you know, governmental officials or policymakers and elected officials, we're all kind of communicating from our own little domain, but we don't frequently come together to say, all right, you know, how do we communicate this in a unified manner to the communities at large? And when I talk about communities at large, I'm talking about Miami-Dade County, right? 2.7 million people. So I think I'll keep it short there, but I think that's a big one.
Yeah. Yes. Bobby?
So I think an important thing was to
using the word to in this context, we're not supposed to do anything to people. It has to be with, it has to be respectful. I think that's just a huge problem with this in general.
Yeah.
Because we talk about doing this to and for instead of with, and considering the community as an equal, and in some cases more important participant, many cases more important, if not mostly more important participant.
Thanks. We're gonna run through question number 4, and then we're gonna have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. And what I hope is gonna be a lively discussion, not questions and answers, but a lively discussion among the group. So this the general question is, how can we manage the key political and geopolitical parameters? So I'm gonna ask the panelists to weigh in, not a long time, but a little bit, so we can have time for our questions and answers. How can we better understand inter-community engagement and issues like competing tax base within the communities, or even read it, I don't have to read it for you. What do you think?
I have a lot of thoughts on what was being discussed and I'm having trouble organizing all my thoughts, so. I just wanted to tell a brief story about what happened recently. I went to a press conference for an entity that was celebrating the release of a research project they were doing to look at how they could build resilience in the community. And the idea was that they had hired this firm to help do part of the research and the community engagement component. And the result or the output was going to be a guide on how to build community resilience. And they wanted to do a public focus group right then and there. So a bunch of community members were there, including myself. And the community members were upset for obvious reasons because they had already been putting in place all this infrastructure for years to build that kind of resilience. We're talking about resilience to extreme weather events like hurricanes. So in the time of extreme need, when the city shuts down for 72 hours, where people get food, water, ice, access to charging stations. And the whole thing was pretty cringy, I'm not gonna lie, and I'm not gonna name names, but the first thing that came to mind was when they applied for this grant, because this entity had actually applied for a grant to get this funding, to hire these 2 engineering firms that were then reaching out to us to get community feedback on how to do some community outreach. It just seemed like the whole thing seemed a little bit backwards in how they approached it. And I thought, why didn't they consult the community when they were in the application process? So say, trying to do this, the idea is to benefit the community, but they didn't bring the community in the beginning. And we're talking about millions of dollars. And one of the projects they did a few years ago that cost something like 200 grand. Again, I can't give too many details, but the point is, CLEO could have taken that $200,000 and done probably 10 times what was produced. Like all we have now is this one piece of infrastructure. It's pretty, but that's pretty much all it does. It's hard to move. So bringing people in way before we think we need to bring them in, so really early in the stages. And also I sit in a position at CLEO where I get a lot of proposal letters for collaborations with university projects. And oftentimes we're given 4 to 5 days to decide on if we want to collaborate on a project that there's no funding defined, the scope of work is not defined. And we're like, it's Friday afternoon in the middle of doing the annual audit for CLEO. And I'm told that by Monday I have to put together a support letter. I have to get a hold of my ED, who's doing a million other things, and discuss. I don't have time to look at the RFP. So I guess some of the things that come to mind are the funding structures, like you mentioned, philanthropy is flawed, like the 1-year grant cycle, but also the amount of money given for the community outreach portion, which they say in the grant RFPs is now a big part of the RFP, like all the stuff coming down from the IRA, the EPA, all that stuff, the focus is on collaboration and community engagement. But the funding allotted for that portion is probably a lesser, maybe it's 10% of the budget, or maybe it should be other way around, 90% for community engagement, the other 10% for, I don't really know exactly what everyone does, but I know that you do a lot of research and it takes a lot of time. So I guess my point is that in positions of power in academia or where I'm sitting, using that power to lobby funders, the government, always trying to use the power of our voice to make things better from the top down is really important, because one thing that we do at CLEO is we're also trying to move giants, and by that is some of our funders. We try to sit with our funders and say, look, you're giving me this 1-year grant cycle, without me being able to have any sustainability in a program, and you're also giving me $20,000, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that when we're trying to pay people good salaries, good benefits, for a social justice organization. Anyway, there's a lot of things going on. I guess I'm just trying to say is use the powers and the seats that you sit in and lobby those who are putting that funding forward. And I think the discrepancy between how much community engagement they want and how much funding they put towards that, there's a big gap there.
Thank you.
I would just add, because I think one of the things you brought up was funding, right? So like with the root of your issue, right? How that funding is allocated, right? It's allocated to like the wrong group, right? Like through, and so just thinking about this question and this sort of theme of the workshop and regional sustainability, a lot of it comes down to this, right? It's that competition, right? It's the competition between cities, it's the competition between tax bases, organization, and it pushes like the actual issue, which is sea level rise, resilience, out of focus, right? It's sort of a secondary thing because everybody's sort of jockeying for a project or a proposal or a research grant. And so and we saw this with the Watershed Initiative, right? We worked across all communities and we had this really still a wonderful mission and inter-coordination. And we wanted the communities to work together. We wanted them to work, isolate nonprofits to be their applicants that represented their communities. And the nonprofits competed with each other. The communities competed with each other. And it was really hard because we made it competitive, right? We see all these things are competitive. And one of the things that we think may work, right, is to not make it competitive, right? And to say, we're going to give you these funds because you need them, right? And coming up with a formula and a system, a regional system, right? So where you have some sort of framework, you have identified partners, you have institutions that people trust that are identified from the bottom up, that can take those funds and use them where they're best used, where they have the biggest impact, to your point. Because we saw this, and it's like you lose a lot of money in administration, you lose a lot of money in decision making about who gets the money. And we're seeing lots of programs, the federal, state, and local level, lots of decisions, and they're getting muddled in who gets what. And so I do feel like, not to hawk planning again, but I feel like, some decision making is limited because they're kind of they're saying if a project's in a plan, we'll fund that. Sometimes they'll kind of take it out. You still have to pick who does it, right? And that's, thank you, United States and capital markets and freedom. But there's a balancing act that we're seeing and that it gets kind of caught in that stream.
Mhm.
And so where we can streamline decision making at a regional level and reduce competition at a local level, there may be a maximum impact that you can find with dollars that are funneled differently. And so that's just something that I've observed over time and am curious to see, where it goes long term.
Okay. No, question? No? Okay.
I'll take a stab at this, but the major issue is, as we have seen it, is the political boundaries guide most of our decision making and decision makers. So in Texas, what we have is called Council of Governments. So if there is a storm, sometimes that I've heard, and I'm looking at it in deeper perspective, that some counties have like exchange policies that people will evacuate to certain designated counties. So that kind of overcomes some of the barriers and those discussions. But yeah, this is a problem that we don't have a solution to as of now. Watershed is a major issue because what we are seeing with Clean Coast, Texas, it's a GLO project. And we are part of it. We are seeing engaging communities in those discussions along the coast, trying to help work with them to prepare their stormwater management plans. it takes time and it's not a 1 year, 2 year funding cycle that will get it done. Because they're very busy, county officials are very, very busy, so getting them to hear and understand. And I've been told that if you don't have money to bring to the county or the community, don't come.
Right.
So that's, again, bring your money, bring your expertise of writing those grants. They don't have people to write grants. We can give them X number of grant opportunities, but it's not going to get converted. So help them write the grants for bringing the money to their community.
Well, this question of competition, I think, is a really interesting one because I know in some research now about affiliates, everybody says nature is like survival of the fittest, but it's really a different kind of survival of the fittest. It's really more of a collaborative kind of survival of the fittest. And if in fact nature can be our model, then what does capitalism look like in that more affiliate model? Is there a new capitalism? Is there a capitalism there? We have, we use this analogy of the grass tops, right? And then the grassroots, and then in the middle, the grass tops of the government mostly, and political leaders and business leaders, and then the grassroots are all the people, the real people, and then right in the middle are the NGOs, the grass stalks. And I think at least a little bit what I'm hearing in this conversation is should that be turned upside down so the roots are on the top? Maybe it's a bromeliad. I'm not sure how it works, but anyway, why don't we move forward into there's two more quick questions, and then we're going to have questions and answers. So, what kind of community do you live in? We clearly have an underrepresentation of rural communities in this room, right? So we have to take everything we've said with that in mind, right? How do folks in your community interact with other types of communities? What are the mechanisms that you, as an urbanist, and I'm seeing suburbanists and urbanists. I mean, suburbanists and urbanists don't necessarily relate to each other all the time, much less urbanists and ruralists. So what are the mechanisms? Are there NGOs? Are there clubs? Are there, I don't know. I mean, are there any interrelationships between these very different kinds of communities?
Expectations of these communities and
Yeah, recreation, like in Florida.
We don't interact with
very
that.
small.
Good. Okay. Interesting tourism. Everybody ends up like in New Orleans, man. We have everybody. 17 million people poured into New Orleans from anywhere and everywhere. And everybody, they all end up at the same bar. Anyway, we're not going there. So now I really want to sort of stop and say, not just questions and answers, but stand up and tell us some stuff. It's not just a question.
I'd like to get some thoughts from the panel about how we can bring people on the ground into these conversations about sea level rise. Given that they're really, that's a, for many people a down the road issue compared to what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. How do we put sea level rise in the context of employment, inflation, education, and the real world issues that people face in their lives and get them? It just seems so unimportant to many people in the community where I live, and I'm one of the rurals on that list. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges about getting people engaged. I'm not quite sure what we mean by communities. I'm assuming we mean people. But I think ideas on that would be really appreciated.
So I'm ask the panelists, and then if anybody else be thinking about that, maybe people in the room might have opinions. Yes.
So community engagement only goes so far. And what I mean by that is, like I said, we have very little to offer. So at some point, it becomes about how you can translate community concerns to conducting equitable research with questions informed by those interactions. You're not always going to be able to get everybody to connect the dots between what they're currently facing and your issue. I think it's more of how are you conducting research when nobody is looking and nobody is talking to you? So what I mean by that is some things in like resilience research are reduced to like study limitations. And in reality, they are like fatal flaws that should have meant like pause, adapt, switch it up, figure out how to engage better, the folks that you want to hear from, how to restructure the research questions so that people can answer in a way that that is informative. And so I don't actually think that going to a community and like phrasing and rephrasing and phrasing again until they speak directly to the issue that you care about is like a productive use of time. At some point, we as researchers who have aggregated the type of privilege that allows us to think 10 and 20 and 30 years into the future, have to connect the dots, but it's like how we connect the dots that's the issue.
Anybody else on the panel? Okay, Bobby.
So we learned so much during and after Katrina to address this very question, primarily because every system failed, but for the community. And you can read a million reports, you can read a million white papers that talk specifically about that. It was the local community members that and the community-based organizations that saved the city from the earliest in dealing with it until all the way through. And we can't forget that. And just as an example, there were a few people, leaders, I don't need to name names, but there were a few people in New Orleans who really saw the value of these community members, mostly women of color, who were on the ground doing the work, organizing their neighborhoods, and they then seized the opportunity to support these women and offer them an opportunity to go to the Aspen Institute and share their knowledge and teach others about the skills that they have that brought real resilience to the city and to neighborhoods to be recreated better and in respect of the people who were on the ground and the people who were left, who didn't get the chance to have the resources to evacuate and live somewhere. And to take, again, some of those community leaders to the Kennedy School at Harvard to, again, not be taught, but to teach others in their skills to be those kind of resilient community members that are the ones that make it work. And so we really have to elevate the knowledge of those people and flip that, who's teaching who to do what. And it's, when we worked on LA Safe, those people, primarily, marginalized communities who were on the bleeding edge of climate change in Louisiana, they know what to do. They know what they're facing. And we need to, again, flip that paradigm, flip that learning opportunity so that we can learn from them and give them the resources to thrive and give them the resources to help teach us what we need to do.
Thank you. Okay, yes, sir.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Salvador Romo. You wanted to ask a question. Is there any economic, I guess, opportunities communities have research or found regarding sea level rising?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are a lot of like grants opportunities. Is that what you're looking?
No, I'm talking about actual communities engaging to economic activity, but they found an opportunity because sea rising.
The only,
No, just ways of living and getting advantage of whatever is provided by nature because it is rising.
right, I think that, I think I see what you're saying, and the communities that I think are benefiting from sea level rise are slightly inland, right? They're just up the coast. And it's where people are retreating to, right? So we call them receiver communities, you know, as Bonnie mentioned earlier with the LA State program, that migration, right? So the communities who are really seeing a benefit and growth, right? Infrastructure boom, tax base increase, it's because of the retreat from the coast. That happens a little bit each storm that we have in Louisiana. I can't speak to Florida. And I think in Texas, we also see private companies, lots of benefits in dredging and coastal projects. Lots of dredging companies, you know, as we build and restore levees, and build new levees, to the course, you know, program. There's lots of, you know, speculation around dredging and needing to, you know, shore up these walls. But there are unfortunately, there's opportunities and there's ways to manage that. But those are the two things that I've seen starkly beneficial. Sad.
Yeah, but also the other aspects of sea level rise, as you see your waters being more saline. And the fishing industry has been impacted by that a lot. So how is the changing water quality as a result of sea level rise impacting? But positive impacts, we haven't seen much in that.
Tracking the changes.
Yeah, and to some extent, the economic value is what value you put to it. So how would you value your land loss and your land like issues to inland construction and building? I mean, how do you value your ecological inputs in the first place? So how much value are you putting to that? I think that valuation is still not clear, and when we use some methods of valuation, but that's not a proper valuation. It's very easy to put a valuation on your land and property and stuff like that.
We do have some economists in the room now, so you have thoughts.
So we're going to take one more question or one more comment or one more challenge, whatever it is. Because we're going to have to move on. To the next one.
I'm gonna circle back to my question in regards to Indigenous communities as well as minority communities. Because I don't think maybe I missed this, but I didn't really hear an answer on how we can already with academics not starting off the best foot, especially with indigenous communities. How can we regain that trust? How can we reconcile, you know, certain things that are out of our control in order to work with them to understand what they determine what is resilient? And then the second question to this is, what do we do when the community doesn't care to have their certain assets be resilient? Because like I said, we focus a lot on let's go in there, let's make these communities resilient. But certain cultural communities have certain assets that they don't want to be resilient. And I don't really hear a lot of that dialogue and that conversation a lot. I'm in the preservation field, so we talk about this and still are like, I don't know. You know, and I get comprehensive planning and we have preservation plans as well, but they also just collect on a shelf. And so I don't really see a lot of times the successful implementation of these plans. So I think that was like a three-parter question, but they're really good questions. I mean, I love where we only improve if we criticize what we do, right? And I think y'all are both right. You said this earlier, like comprehensive plans have a lot to improve on, but I think in Louisiana, I mean, selfishly, we're developing comprehensive plans. So I'm like, when we add whole new sections that look at risk and resilience and long-term sustainability, and the communities are more educated because of UNOP and Katrina and all the storms that have hit us, and there's more awareness of flood risk, and they need to develop new infrastructure, look at migration. And but to your point about indigenous cultures, I think you have to be really, really receptive. You have to hear that they are the messenger, they are their own truth. And there's a risk tolerance that we have to appreciate, right? So I do feel like just, you know, I've met a New Yorker. I don't know if anybody's from New York. I was there a couple of years ago for a conference, and they were like, "Why do you live in Louisiana? That's like really stupid." We had a coffee or talking, and he's like, "You seem like an intelligent person. Why are you living in Louisiana?" And I told him, I said, I have a very high risk tolerance, right? And it's not a lack of intelligence. It's not a stubbornness. It's a cultural, it's a, you know, asset. It's an economy question, right? There's three legs to the stool that I see, you know, and the risk tolerance, we do not measure this. You know, there is no scale for this. We can talk about which are risks. We can explain people, sea level rise, but if they're willing to put on white rubber boots and wade through water every morning on a Wednesday during, you know, high tide, that's like their decision, right? And there's a respect for that, you know, sturdiness and that culture and that history. And I think, you know, our programs and our policies do not do that either. It's a broad brush. It's a one size fits all, you know, it's how FEMA operates. And communities have reacted negatively to that. They walked away from solutions because there is no scaling of risk tolerance. And so I think we fail a lot of times when we develop plans without that metric in mind. Policies need to be adapted for that. Where if you have a community that doesn't want to leave, then your policies look different. They focus on evacuation, right? How do you get people out? Because that's what you're going to need to do. Focus on getting people out in those times of disaster, not buying everybody out. And so there's a whole different suite of policies that should be employed based on a community's response, but we don't talk about risk clearly enough. We don't explain it clearly enough. Elected officials are kind of afraid to talk about risk because they don't want their tax base to just migrate to the community upward of them or north, right? And so it's a really complex communication that needs to take place. And I think even our comprehensive plans have to be oriented around these different metrics that don't measure. And so establishing that measurement is huge to the success of telling people, this is your community's risk threshold. Do you want to live here? If you do, have that awareness, know that this is what we have in place to keep you safe long-term. And then if you're not, they have the wherewithal and the awareness that's been communicated clearly so they can choose to leave. And people who are there are not shocked when storm comes and they have 3 feet of water in their house. You know, those people are all like, we knew this is what it was going to be like. We're okay with it. There's really no way right now to establish that type of decision-making, communication, and planning. And that's what makes it hard with, I think, Indigenous and people who every day who are super busy with their lives don't want to talk about flood risk and resilience. They're like, they leave it to us to figure it out. But that's the issue that we have to get from them. What is their risk tolerance? That is something we do not know unless we talk to people. And it affects the success of any plan and the success of any project. But it's not measured anywhere, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I've looked.
We're gonna have to close it down, but I want to make one quick high level observation, and that is that we get what we measure, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the question is, in our democratic system, well, who would have ever thought that we'd figure out how to make democracy work in only a couple hundred years, right? So if in fact we choose what we measure, I highly recommend to you, if you haven't seen it already, a beautiful video of Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama spending a week together. And the thing that they talked about and the thing that they measured is love. What would it look like if the thing that we measured was love? So that's, there is a beautiful book I recommend to you by the two researchers at Stanford that I mentioned. And the title of the book is called The Beloved Economies. And what it postulates is what would a post-capitalist system look like if the outcome that we saw was not money, but love. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Stephen, and all our panelists for this excellent conversation and with intriguing questions and actually provoking thoughts, and the conversation continues. And I know there are people to make comments to questions. The next conversation or then the next are not going to be totally a different area. So we are going to be staying in the same topic, this your questions, your comments are still, if you didn't have a chance to do it right now, as I said, it continues and they are still relevant. But we have to give a break at some point, and that point is now. So I am going to call for what is this? I'm going to see maybe on the
I'll start close. Move on. Casi Callaway is the Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Mobile in the Office of Resilience, and she is the first CRO for the state of Alabama. Next, we have Patricia Gomez. She serves as the Deputy Chief Resilience Officer for the Miami-Dade County's Office of Resilience. Next is Tony Williams. He's a marine biologist with the Texas General Land Office, where he leads the Coastal Texas Protection and Restoration Feasibility Study and their Coastal Resiliency Master Plan. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. And then last but not least, Denise Reed. She's with the Convergent Institute for Environmental Sciences at the University of North in Louisiana. So we have a pretty good geographic representation across the Gulf Coast states. And I'm going to kind of start off with a similar introductory question that we heard from the first panel, which is kind of putting your work into perspective for the audience, telling us how your organization or you in particular kind of handle or address or tackle resilience planning. And if you want to tell us what you think when you hear resilience planning, what that means for your organization and for your communities, maybe include that as well. So I think we'll hear from everyone on those questions. So let's just start with you, Keith, if you want.
There we go.
Does that work?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. I'm Casi Callaway, and I came to the Office of Resilience, which I convinced the mayor to create from 30 years of doing environmental advocacy work. So I worked in Washington, D.C. and in South Florida for the Clean Water Action, doing Florida Everglades restoration. So I'm happy. It's been a long time since I've been in your neighborhood, so thank you for having me. And then work for Mobile Baykeeper. I started Mobile Baykeeper first, actually the first water keeper in the state of Alabama too, and was there for 23 years before I convinced the mayor. He convinced me. We kind of go back and forth on that. I really had talked to him for a long time about the need for a chief resilience officer for the city. And when it came down to it, he's like, I still don't exactly know what that is, so I'm gonna let you do it. And it's been amazing and a lot of learning, and really learning the difference between sustainability and resilience, understanding what that means, what Mobile's willingness is to get involved and engaged in resilience versus sustainability. And a lot of that has all been trial by error, and I have been learning, or trial by fire, I don't know, maybe both. And really learning from other chief resilience officers and people who are smarter than me, who know how to do this work. So that's been a lot of what I've done. For the city of Mobile, we really look at resilience as our ability to survive, adapt, and thrive. So we like that terminology, and it's the chronic stressors as well as the acute shocks. So we're really digging into how that goes. We want to measure it with the ability to bounce back. How quickly do we, but more not just bounce back. And this is a lot of the early panel and what y'all talked about that is like feeding my soul is how do we make that baseline for our communities higher, better, or at least maybe even? That would be awesome, as opposed to so much disparity across the systems. We are doing a resilience assessment and plan, and then I'll finish it with that. We've hired the Water Institute of the Gulf and a bunch of local firms too. So they're amazing if y'all don't know them. And they are digging into assessing what we have, what our tools, what our policies, what our ordinances look like for us to be a resilient community. We're in that phase right now, and then we'll start the planning as soon as that's complete.
Thank you. And my name is Patricia Gomez, and I have been working for Miami-Dade County for a long, long time, more than I want to admit in any of these presentations. But we started the Office of Sustainability like around 15 years ago, and then we transitioned into the Office of Resilience with the 100 Rockefeller Cities program. We were the first county that joined the program with 2 cities. So we actually was Miami-Dade County with City of Miami and City of Miami Beach. I don't know how many of you are locals, but Miami-Dade County is more like a mini regional type of government. Miami-Dade County has like 2.7 million people, and we have 34 municipalities, plus an area that is unincorporated Miami-Dade County. And the county provides certain services to the municipalities, not all. So again, we started with the Resilient Cities Framework. We have our strategy out. And then from then on, we are starting to work on a more specific projects. Like, for example, we have our sea level rise plan, our climate action and strategy plan, and many of these frameworks that are important. In the last couple of years, we have been really working really hard to expand our horizons. We have a great mayor, Mayor Daniela Livancava, and she can put us in asteroids. So Resilient is not only working now in the traditional context, but we have the Chief Bay Officer. Biscayne Bay is a great resource here in Miami-Dade County, a natural resource that impacts our potable water. We have a Chief Heat Officer to deal with extreme heat, which is becoming more and more relevant. And then we have a Director of Resilience Planning and Implementation, because we understand that resiliency is not about our little group doing resilient. It's about all our 30,000 employees implementing resiliency in whatever work they do on a daily basis. And working with the university partners, working with the municipalities, and working with the region, also with our counterparts in Monroe, Broward, Palm Beach. So I think over this 15 years, we have evolved, and we are trying to, in the last couple of years, make sure that we incorporate equity as a big part of our program. And so that's what we have been doing for a long time.
Work. There we go. Okay, I'm Tony Williams, work with the Texas General Land Office. I worked for the General Land Office for 27 years, 1 month, and 9 days. Started on January 2nd, so it's easy to keep track. GLO really got involved in resiliency planning after Hurricane Ike. We started working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on kicking off the Sabine to Galveston Bay study. It was actually one that had started looking at resiliency efforts on the coast, but was derailed because of Hurricane Ike, and started back up looking at the upper 6 counties in Texas, to try to identify ways to make communities more resilient, looking at both storm surge protection. Is anyone with the Corps of Engineers here? Okay, you can't say protection if you're with the Corps of Engineers, you have to say risk reduction, but I'm not. So I can say protection. And we also looked at ecosystem restoration. And through that study, we started the Coastal Texas study with the Corps of Engineers. The GLO was the non-federal sponsor, split the cost 50-50. And looked at the entire Texas coast to identify ways to reduce the risk to communities from both storm surge and ways to make the ecosystem more resilient. So we identified a way to reduce the risk to the Houston-Galveston area through a combination of beaches and dunes and storm surge gates, and also looked at 8 large-scale ecosystem restoration. And actually, the beaches and dunes are dual-purpose features. They provide both ecosystem restoration benefits to sea turtles, endangered piping plover, recreational benefits, but they're also enhanced in their size to provide some storm surge risk reduction benefits as well. And then we have the 8 ecosystem restoration projects, and then there's a little community down at the south end of Texas. I shouldn't say little community. It's South Padre Island, but I looked at a way to reduce the risk of that community as well through beaches and dunes. So, and complementary to that, the GLO has also been working on the Texas Coastal Resiliency Master Plan. You know, a lot of this we took from Louisiana. They had Katrina a couple of years before we had Ike. Now, Ike wasn't as big as Katrina, but still like $30+ billion of impact. So we're trying to find ways to reduce those impacts. And then they had the Louisiana Master Plan. So we had the Texas Coastal Resilience Master Plan, tried to shamelessly steal as much of what they did as possible. And tried to come up with ways to make our ecosystems and communities more resilient. Make them, we have a lot of erosion in Texas. We have relative sea level rise. So relative sea level rise is where you have subsidence and sea level rise. So we have a lot of that because there are people that groundwater, there's been oil and gas extraction. So parts of Texas have sunk and the sea level has risen. And then we have tropical storms, hurricanes, flood events. So we're trying to identify ways to make communities more resilient. So we had our 2017 Texas Coastal Resiliency Master Plan. It's primarily addressed ecosystem restoration measures because that's what we had our background in. But then after Hurricane Harvey, $100+ billion worth of damage. Some communities got 5 feet of rain in just a little over a day. So it was a really unprecedented events. And our communities, right after that, we started our 2019 Coastal Resiliency Master Plan. So we had a lot of communities really work with us. And so we started integrating ways we could have the gray and green infrastructure work together. And we just finished up our 2023 Coastal Resiliency Master Plan, and that should be released any day now. We decided to go from every 2-year cycle to 4 years, so we can start working on implementation. When we were doing a 2-year cycle, we were, okay, let's get the next round, get the next round. But when we went to 2 years, I was able to get my staff to go out and meet with the communities and identify ways that they could implement some of these projects. And it sure means I have one of the technical advisory committee, and I'll try to talk about that in a little bit. Sorry, I probably too long.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thanks for the invitation to be here today. My name is Denise Reed. I am with the University of New Orleans, but I'm not here as an academic researcher. I think I'm here really because of my work on planning in coastal Louisiana over a number of decades. As a researcher, I worked on sea level rise and coastal wetlands, and was involved in plans for coastal ecosystem in Louisiana since the early 90s, and trying to get science and the research and how we understand how the ecosystem works into kind of official plans about what we're going to do. And so one of the important things probably about coastal Louisiana is that we deal with sea level rise, just like everybody around the Gulf Coast does. We deal with storms, just like everybody around the Gulf Coast does. But we also deal with modifications that have been made to our huge coastal ecosystem during the 20th century that lead to extensive land loss. So even if it wasn't for sea level rise and it wasn't for coastal storms, we still have a continuingly degrading coastal system, which then increases risk independent, if you like, of the other hazards. So, Katrina was a big event for the North Central Gulf Coast, and we think of it as Katrina and Rita in Louisiana, because Katrina was very much a Southeast Louisiana situation, but Rita was particularly impactful in Southwest Louisiana. And so after that, Louisiana decided that it really needed to think in a more integrated way about how the future of the coastal ecosystem and protecting communities from storm surge-based flooding. And so these two purposes were meshed together. And we think about ecosystem restoration in Louisiana, not just because we like wetlands and ecosystems are important, but because they're actually really essential for our commercial fishing industry and other aspects of the coastal economy. And so, anyway, to kind of cut to the chase here, being involved in those plans, the 2023 version of the Coastal Master Plan, which is now out on draft, was released in early January. This is a state has a plan for how it wants to invest in protecting people from storm surge-based flooding and for the future of the coastal ecosystem. And I'm not going to use the word resilience for that, because we are not bouncing back. There is no bouncing back in Louisiana. And this plan specifically recognizes that. It tries to say what we can do that will make a difference, what we can do that will make things not as bad as they would otherwise be, but to give communities a realistic picture of what the future may hold. And so I think that's something that has been, and there's a lot of science behind the plan. I could talk endlessly about that. There's an awful lot of analysis and things like that behind it. But I think that that's one of the things that's been really important about this. And the other thing is that I think, I'll talk about that in a minute, but it does incorporate storm surge flooding, sea level rise, and land loss together. It also considers other aspects of climate change, particularly in how they influence the surface water balance, not in terms of heat stress to communities and people. It doesn't deal with human health issues, but we do deal with temperature change, runoff changes, freshwater delivery to the coastal system, and those kinds of things. And so it's not just about sea level rise. It does try to look more broadly in that, but it doesn't look at all the other things that people who live at the coast are going to face. One thing I just want to say about it is that the plan that is on the street now identifies, it's a 50-year, $50 billion plan, and it identifies a number of structural projects like floodgates, levees, those kinds of things, to protect communities from storm surge-based flooding. It also includes $11 billion in non-structural risk reduction. That is floodproofing, elevating, or voluntary acquisition. And so we're very much recognizing that the future is not going to be the same, and that people are going to have to change how they live and work on the coast. And there's not really anything the state is going to be able to do about that. So.
Thank you. Yeah, those are great perspectives on how we're tackling resilience, how we're thinking about resilience, what resilience will mean for us now and moving forward into the future for these different communities. I think there are a lot of commonalities across this Gulf state, 5 Gulf states. It's probably one of the hardest regions of the U.S. to plan for and make decisions about regarding climate change and impacts to very diverse communities across this region. And I also want to recognize that we have a range of geographic scopes represented. So people working at a very high level, at the state level, to down to a city level, to the city scale. And different ranges of maturation in terms of resilience planning and having established offices of resilience and having official positions around resilience planning. So with that in mind, so I want each of you to talk a little bit about how you are integrating sea level rise planning efforts across urban, rural communities or areas. and or across your county boundaries or other administrative units, depending on how you work. Does anyone want to start off with that? Maybe Patricia.
I can start. So we have been using the adaptation action areas model here in Miami-Dade County to really work on a multi-jurisdictional areas. As you can see in Miami-Dade County, we have cities, but we also have the South Florida Water Management District and other entities that have an interest in the areas. These adaptation action areas, we have been focusing on those areas that get seasonal flooding. I'm sure you have heard about the sunny day flooding. And these areas is where we have the sea level rise impacting the stormwater system. And so they get flooded every other month or every 2-3 months, and then they have repetitive loss in the communities. So what we do is we have a program where we go to the community, we work with all the agencies involved. We go there, we talk to them, we start analyzing what are the strengths that community has first. And then after we identify those assets that are on a strength, then we can start talking about the risks and how we are going to manage those future risks. And what are the options that we have in that area to address those problems. In our sea level rise strategy, we have 10 primary options. So we include building elevated, moving to other areas. So we want to understand from the community perspective, what is that they want to do. A lot of these communities are working communities, so they don't have the availability to say, okay, my house is inundating, so I'm going to move on, I'm going to close and move. It's very difficult, or they also don't have the capital that says, okay, I'm going to elevate my house, I don't know, 5 feet to be able to sustain. So how we can work with the community, what are the solutions that the community has? We need to really think about that the process needs to be equitable, not just the outcomes. And we provide a lot of tools. So we create maps, we kind of pinpoint the areas, and within that specific area, what are the pockets that are inundating? What are the resources that we have? Perhaps we can move the community to another place. Miami-Dade County has a ridge, so we do have higher ground, of course, not in the cost. So we can think about having green ways, blue ways, and then move people a little higher up. But like everybody was saying, how we can really help the community to develop the way they want. Another area is also seeking grant funding. And in this last round of funding, we applied with the FEMA BRIC grant, the Building Infrastructure in Resilience Communities, and we got $50 million for another area, our second AAA in the Biscayne CA Canal, and looking at with that grant to make changes to that canal. Perhaps so into some elevation of the canal banks in the secondary canal system owned by the county, and incorporating nature-based features along the canal. So by working with the different institutions, with the community and with the others, we can then start getting these grants to do some of the work that we need.
So we've been working with a lot of communities similar to, we've been providing the tools, we've been doing the models showing how communities are going to be affected. And some of the rural communities are really impacted. And you can show that what could be happening in 20 years because of relative sea level rise, the evacuation routes are underwater or almost underwater immediately after a storm surge starts coming in, so they'd have to evacuate earlier. All the schools, electrical infrastructure, water treatment plant, all are much more at risk. And so we've been trying to work with our communities so they can have these tools, so they can plan and work with them to identify the different funding sources. Because of Harvey and some other events in Texas, we have a good bit of funding that are available through community development block grants. So we try to point the communities into the ways that they can fund ways to make themselves more resilient. And we're really trying to identify ways that we can utilize the green to protect the communities, whether it's building a beach or dune in front of a evacuation route, or if it is building a marsh or a living shoreline along the bay so they reduce the erosion. So we really try to give the community the tools, and the more urban areas, they are much more aware of it. Somebody said earlier about the drainage system we have. The city of Galveston has a drainage system that's like 150 years old, and they're having to upgrade. And we're trying to work with them to identify ways to upgrade and work that into ways to reduce storm surge and put in a barrier. So it's a very demanding way, and it takes a lot of coordination. But really, it's important that everybody has the tools and the modeling and how it's going to affect them in the long run.
Yeah, I think on this, we have large areas of coastal Louisiana which have very low population density, very small communities distributed along bayous or in particularly in the southwestern part of the state, and so within the context of the coastal master plan, it looks at the state as a whole, and we did this two things I want to mention here. One relative to the coastal master plan is we're very conscious of the fact that making any decision processes that looks at dollars damaged as part of the decision process is going to disproportionately, not consider the needs of some of these less prosperous, shall we say, rural communities, or where the structures themselves, the houses, the homes are not worth that much money. And so we developed a new approach for doing this, which is it's not that revolutionary, I don't think, but it doesn't use dollars. It basically looks at the percent of the structure that's damaged. So if a structure is damaged 10%, it doesn't matter whether that structure is worth $50,000 or $500,000. It's just 10% of the structure. And so this, I think, has been really helpful to us in really, moving towards, being more even, having a more even consideration of all the different types of communities that we have in Louisiana. I did, teeing off of what Tony said there. Again, I'm looking at it this because I work a lot with the state government, with state agencies, and one of the key things about the master plan is each governor since 2006 has issued an executive order that all state activities have to be consistent with the coastal master plan. So this means that all state agencies in their activities have to do things that are consistent with the master plan. But we haven't yet got to the point that Tony was talking about, where the other agencies like Transportation and Development that's doing roads, or Health and Human Hospitals, or Children and Family Services, or those other state agencies that are working directly out there in the communities, how they are appreciating what is going to happen to coastal change. And so we have an organization, a kind of an initiative that's run out of the governor's office through the chief resilience officer, which I'm happy to say the state of Louisiana now has, called the Adaptive Governance Initiative, where we're trying to work with folks in all state agencies, everything from workforce to corrections to Veterans Affairs, to get them to provide them with the data that they need to think about how things are going to change into the future, so that they can anticipate, working with state facility planning, the people who build state buildings and who will be repairing state buildings when they get damaged during hurricanes that impact along the coast. Think about how they should be putting things back differently in order to plan for where people will likely be in the future. So we're just starting that. That's a little bit more of a reach, but it does start to get us towards this idea about how it's the whole coast and everything that happens on the coast that is impacted by this, not just the damages from flooding.
So I kind of wanted to go last on this one because we're Alabama and we like to be very close to last. Thank God for Mississippi. Y'all might remember that. So except some planning things, super fun. In the 90s, beginning of 2000, Mississippi with the Corps of Engineers did the Mississippi Coastal Improvement Plan. And Alabama had the opportunity to join in that. And we're like, no, thank you. We're good. We don't like plans. We don't want to plan. And then we had Katrina together. We had it too, you know. Louisiana created this Louisiana master plan. And when the BP oil disaster hit, my friends in Louisiana were like, you're screwed. Sorry, y'all. I'm honest. And I really want to still punch this guy in the face. I'll tell y'all who he is later over drinks. But he was 100% right. When the NERDA money came out, Louisiana had a plan. Here you go. Here's some money. When Restore came out, we are spending Restore money now. Like in 2018, the first year we got any of it. I mean, all of it took forever because planning is just not where we have not always seen it as valid. We're valid or valuable, and it's because we make a lovely plan and it becomes shelf art. And I think that's the number one reason. So there's no value in a plan if all you ever do with the plan is not use the plan. There are so many more stories I could tell y'all. Drink, we'll do that. So when we're talking about how are rural communities lining up with urban communities on planning, you know, we're fighting to get a plan. So there's that. But what I can tell you is when the city of Mobile, which is one blip on, you know, a 2-county big area surrounded by Mobile Bay, does a great plan, and we will. I got 9 municipalities in Mobile. I have a boatload of 14 or 16 municipalities in Baldwin County. The whole counties themselves who aren't planning, who aren't doing anything, and I can't make them do anything. So we've got to figure out how that works. When I'm hearing what's going on in Louisiana and Florida, South Carolina, all these states that require comprehensive plans, that require those plans to include resilience, that require every community to have a plan and look around at their next door neighbors. That's where we've got to really get to. So I think, you know, it's a hard conversation over how do you work with the rural or the folk lower income, or the multitude of kinds of communities. But the simple fact is, if we don't have a plan that is going to move our world forward, that is going to be protective and that pushes that. I love the way Kilan, did I say it right? Sorry. She said we have the privilege to look 10, 20, and 30 years ahead. That is real. And frankly, that's the role government needs to be playing in this. That's the role, probably academics. That's the role a lot of our NGOs. We've got to take that responsibility to look 10, 20, 30 years down and, well, in all honesty, also beyond the mayor's term, beyond the whoever elected official's term. That's a hardship, an additional piece we've got to include, not just the who and the where are you right now, but how do we push these elected officials to look past? Well, that's a post insert your official's name term timeline.
Yeah, so I'm gonna piggyback off that, Casey, and so to recognize that not every community is necessarily planning. We've come a long way, and we've mentioned a lot of hurricanes already, depression, and I was gonna say it often takes a disaster like a hurricane to initiate a planning process. So back in 2008, we had hurricanes Gustav and Ike, which Gustav hasn't even been mentioned yet, but that kicked off a pot of funding for resilience planning across the state of Louisiana, which is where it was after that, I guess, starting in 2010. So I guess those funds were distributed to communities through a competitive process around the year 2012. So we're already about 4 years or so from the storms. And that brought money to very small rural communities across the state to do a resilience plan. And for a lot of these communities, it was their very first time planning. They'd never had a plan before of any kind. It also brought, funding to bigger municipalities like New Orleans and other places in coastal Louisiana. But anyway, my question is, how can we better work with communities who may not be planning yet or who may not be as far along in their planning processes, such as smaller, more rural, more disadvantaged communities. Oftentimes it's resistance, it's capacity, limited capacity, it's other factors. And then how can we ensure that we are better coordinating across these urban rural divisions so that we are better off moving forward, everybody. And then recognizing too that we may also be competing with these communities for funding, as with the FEMA BRIC program, or in the state of Florida, we have a new Resilient Florida program that's distributing funds to communities for vulnerability risk assessments and other processes. So how can we make this work? How can we encourage smaller communities to plan, but be better coordinated and help each other kind of move forward with these funds? Kind of a multi-part question.
I'll jump because it kind of leaned a little bit toward what I was saying at the end. I think that it's a lot of the rub that was talked about on the panel. It's how do you help a community that, and I think the gentleman over here said it, you forgot to say, I have a job and I have kids. And so you aren't thinking about a thing because there are other things, there are other competing factors in a lot of our poor communities in Mobile. You're talking about food on the table that night. So you're not, we've got one of our local communities has a failing sewage treatment system right now, and it's where somebody's going to take it over. And how do you do that? And I think that is a role of government. There has to be that connected. There has to be that get in there and find out where the community is and what they need. But if they don't have the bandwidth to look at and talk about resilience is a lot of things that you don't do to a community, that you do for a community, and those are infrastructure things. So how do you build in? Don't just repave that road, y'all. Come on, let's actually put some stormwater storage under that. Let's look at the sewer, the water, all the things that go under that road. Redo it one big time. That lasts 20, 30 years. That doesn't last 20, 30 minutes. And so I think we can help that way. And it's how do you do it? How do you do it in a way that is still supportive of the existing community, really looks at where they are and where they need? You've got to be engaging with those people, but you also have to respect that is a problem that you may be presenting a new problem that isn't currently on their radar that could, I mean, y'all know this, climate change wasn't talked about for a really, really long time because all we could see was no ability to impact it. So we aren't going to even try. And that's, I think, that fine line, scary place where we have to really watch our communities. Are we throwing, are we feeding a fire that can't be put out? Are we making a fire that can't be put out, or that the local community can't put out? So how do we provide support and help? Right, I guess I'm re-asking your question rather than answering it, but it's a lot.
I mean, I really think we have to help people transition. My recollection, my personal experience of the process we went through with the LSA program in Louisiana, where we sat around tables like this with people from the community and had supper and looked at maps and asked them what they wanted what they thought we should do in the face of the change that was coming, was that for the most part, they just couldn't assimilate the magnitude of the change that we were predicting. That they just could not relate to the fact that the water's not going to be that deep. It's never been that deep before. Of course, that is the point. It has never been that deep before. And it's very difficult for people to deal with it. In the county where I live, I've lived there 35 years. I don't know how many schools have closed in the lower Bayou communities and how far kids have to be bused to go to school. And so it's really about that transition, about how we kind of help the local government kind of retreat back. And we can do that through transferring a road from being the state wants to give away some of the state roads and make them be parish roads, county roads, but then the county has to maintain that road. How long can the county keep picking up garbage twice a week at the end of the road for just a few people that live there. And at some point, they're gonna have to make decisions like that. The school board has already made decisions like that. They're already closed, I don't know how many schools. The churches are not having the community, the churches way down the line because there's just not enough people there anymore. So the transition is happening in Louisiana, but it's happening in a haphazard and unorganized way. Whether it should be more deliberately planned is much more difficult to get our arms around. People don't want to do that, even though the local government probably recognizes that it needs to happen. And so we're in this kind of, we know we've got the chronic problem that things are not going to get better necessarily. We've got to cope with that future. But I think it comes back to this issue that was raised earlier. How do we take these opportunities of the acute events to kind of make the transition and not gradually make the kind of, I don't know. I think you can see what I'm trying to do here. It's just really difficult. And I think one of the things I'm really interested in hearing, being here for a couple of days is how can research help with that? What do we need to know? What can we find out that will help us? That will help us and help communities and governments make that transition. And so, not a very optimistic discussion here. I'm sorry about it. I think we're all here to be realistic.
So after Hurricane Harvey, we had a lot of participation in Texas from some of the small communities. I had our technical advisory committee meetings. We had some, city councilmen come in and tell us about how they had to stay in their church for 4 days because it was completely surrounded by 4 feet of water. There's no way out. There was a lot of interest in doing resiliency planning because these communities in East Texas, they got hit by Rita, they got hit by Ike, they got hit by Harvey, they got hit by all these other storms, and they've had like 500-year events in the past 12 years. So I mean, you try to tell them this is a 500-year event, they say, well, we had one a few years ago. So they're realizing they need to plan, and so when immediately afterwards there's this funding available for them, they start taking advantage of that. But then kind of life gets in the way. Had a meeting last fall with a community in East Texas. We were trying to get them to work with the GLO. We were going to pay like 95% of the project costs. They needed to basically provide the land and just a little bit of local participation and the planning part, and then we would pay for 100% of the construction. And sit in the meeting with the city manager, several council meetings, several council members, and this is a community. I've known these folks for a long time. I worked on the post I cleanup, so I had community trusted me, but they just told me that we've got to either put the time and effort into rebuilding roads that have potholes and aren't passable, or we're going to do this project that we understand is important, but we don't have enough bandwidth to do it. And I thought at the end I had convinced them, it would be good for long range planning to provide all these multiple benefits, reducing erosion, to providing ecotourism benefits and shrimping opportunity, increase the shrimp. But at the end, they said no, because they had only limited resources and they didn't have the capacity to do both of them, even though it was not going to cost them very much. The GLO was going to pay for the vast majority of the project. And that was, it broke the heart of a guy that works for me. His name is Josh. He's a very empathetic person. And, he was he was almost ready to quit because he was so disappointed by this community not doing that. And you have to say, sometimes people can't. They've got to deal with the issue. And again, how do we do that? And we got some communities in Texas that, they had the opportunity to participate, and now every time they get an opportunity, they're chomping at the bit. But it's getting a community to kind of take that first plunge. So I don't know if I answered a question or brought a question up or, but, yeah. Anyway.
So is anybody kind of working, like, you know, we talk, I'm struggling, we're using this word community and it can mean so many different kind of scales, right? And so, but this issue of capacity is a real issue. I mean, has anybody got like a kind of way of organizing communities together to kind of provide capacity for them? Is that the kind of thing that you all do? Or I'm sorry, Emily, I shouldn't be asking that question, but I think this issue of capacity is a real one, and really want to see if anybody's got a solution.
I'm going to answer this from my previous life a little bit. As Mobile Baykeeper, we did it a lot. So we worked with, and I want to start it there because it leads into where I do think we need to go. As Mobile Baykeeper, we ended up having to sue a low-income community sewage treatment facility provider because that entire community paid their bill and they weren't processing sewage. It was dumping on street. I mean, you know, like all the bad things, everything wrong. But meanwhile, everybody paid their bill. So, or you got it cut off at your home. So, you know, it was not right the way we didn't want to go after a low income community, predominantly Black community. But at the same time, the predominantly Black community that was a receiver of the sewage to be treated was, anyway, hopefully y'all understand that. But we did it because we had capacity. The local community did not. But everything we did, and it was a very big learning curve for me to make sure we were checking on the community. What do you want the solution to be? We did it at Mobile Baykeeper in applying for grants for or on behalf of smaller community organizations or smaller communities as a whole, who the mainly federal government didn't trust to manage the grant, and they didn't have capacity to manage the grant either. But it was really easy. It was almost 100% pass through, but it was a way to really build that community support and build the capacity of the organizations. That happens a lot. I loved what you talked about, or actually it was Bobby talked about with post Katrina. I met some of the most incredible people from New Orleans all the way to Florida, all of us worked together after Katrina, and a lot of those folks who did these incredible projects and kept getting supported. Rockefeller Family Foundation supported a lot of our work after that. And that money had just barely ended when we had the BP oil disaster. So what had happened was these communities were so much stronger then. So when that next disaster, including Mobile, which Mobile had pretended like Katrina didn't happen to us. And so the bayou was wrecked and we didn't get support or knowledge or anything. But with the spill, we said, hey, y'all, we're here. We didn't have a plan, but we still kept on building and doing that. As in my new role, working really hard to make sure we do that too. It's harder from a city and a government perspective. It's harder for us to help the government or the small city next door to us. For a million reasons, like we can't give them our money, but you know, after Sally and Zeta, they didn't have capacity to do all the pickup of debris. So we went and our garbage and trash trucks were picking up their debris. So we do it every time we can, but it's not structured. And so now that I'm in government and seeing that is one of the things I think we've got to figure out how to do, especially you know, the lower income, smaller communities, smaller cities that are, you know, old cities, been around a really long time. So it's not, they need our help the most, and we have the ability to help, but there's a fear of what that looks like. So that's a big piece we're still trying to break through.
Yeah, I think when in Miami-Dade County, we don't have a rural community, of course, we are all developed, but that doesn't mean that we have it smaller cities. And right. What we have been doing in Miami-Dade County is we are sharing our knowledge and seeing how we can help them with their plans. So as Emily was saying, the state of Florida is providing sources or funding for all the cities to conduct a vulnerability analysis. So what we are doing is we are telling them, this is how we are doing it, or we can do it for the entire county, for example, for roads, and we can do the analysis for everybody, and then we can give you that little piece so you can add it to your vulnerability analysis. We also did seek funding. So because we already have our vulnerability analysis going on, we share our funding with those cities that may not have the resources, the capacity, or didn't seek the grant. So we can do it for them, and that we did it under the Southeast Climate Compact, which is the four counties, Monroe, Miami-Dade County, Broward, and Palm Beach. We work on a collaborative together. So the collaborative seek the funding, and we are passing that funding to the cities, the smaller cities that don't have the capacity. And you know, we tell them you are welcome to copy and paste if that fits your needs. We have spent the time, we have the consultants. We can benefit us, and you can benefit, and we are always trying to work with them. How can we integrate them in our projects, in our work, like I said, in the AAA, this is smaller cities, but it's also important to empower them so that they can work with us along to make the decisions. So we have a couple of projects the corporate engineers are doing. And so what we are doing is in the charrettes, in the information, we are inviting the municipalities to come and tell their perspective. And we are also taking the corps of engineers to those municipalities and say, well, this is how Miami-Dade County looks like, but this is how Biscayne Bay looks like, and these are the needs of this area, or this is how Qatar Bay has been able to use nature-based solutions to protect the area. So I think it's dual, it's helping them do the planning and providing the tools that we have, but also empower them to be participating in that decision-making process.
Can I say something else?
Sure.
So that brings up a huge issue that we've had at the GLO and in Texas. And, you know, we've gone through this planning process, and we've had engineers and marine biologists try to, you know, every time we got the opportunity, we would go out into the communities and try to, you know, tell folks what's going on. Anytime there was a event that we were invited to, we would go and we would speak out, and, you know, we would tell them what's going on, and had a lot of positive response. But we were not communication professionals. So when the report hit the street, there were some folks that were very against the report, and they were very well organized, and they went out and engaged some communications apparatus and social media, and they called the marine biologists and engineers flat-footed. We got, you know, cream, bam, you know, it was on the front page of the Houston Chronicle how bad it was, and I was in public meetings with people getting, you know, and anyway, once we were able to convince the people with the money that we need to engage some communications professionals, everything got a lot better. We were able to, as even part of our working time, working with the Corps of Engineers, we were able to fund a communications firm that, you know, they set up meetings with local communities, set up meetings with leaders, have a list of folks that we needed to communicate with. So what I'm trying to say is, what you need help in getting word out. You can't just stick to your communities, I guess. And it made the next time we had a report come out, it was a non-event because everybody knew what that report was going to say. The first time the report came out, we had 2 buildings that were beyond capacity. I had to turn people away. The fire marshal said you can't have anybody here. And 99% of them were angry with the report. The next time the report came out, it was a non-event. We had like 17 people show up. So, but because we were able to engage the communications folks, I don't know if I answered the question or.
Yeah, you don't have to talk to me, to hire somebody who does. Yeah. Bring somebody in.
Yeah, so I was going to move into the topic of authentic community engagement in the planning process for kind of more equitable processes and outcomes. But I think I'm going to pause actually and open it up for questions first. I mean, are there any questions from the audience that I want to make sure we have a lot of time to address questions? Sam?
Yeah, should I use a microphone or just shout?
Yeah.
Oh. Hello, thank you. Lots of you represent public institutions on the panel. All of you have represented public institutions at various times, Denise. But I guess the, you know, we talked in the first panel a lot about the kind of lack of relationship between communities and formal institutions. I think it's deeper than that. It's a severe broken relationship. It's not just lack of trust, it's mistrust. It's active mistrust in public entities and institutions. And I guess, how do you approach that as folks representing a public agency, and what is the need to partner with different types of organizations in order to do that work? Because I'm sure it's a challenge in everything you're doing. You alluded to some of it, but it gets to some of the questions that I think you were going to ask Emily too.
So, yeah, we have, going into communities with the Corps of Engineers, a lot of times, you know, they're a very distrusted organization by a lot of people. And you have to overcome a big bump to get them to listen to you. But it's something that, as the state of Texas and in my organization, we on the coast, well, we wear several hats. One is we respond to oil spills. You know, if there's an oil spill, we send folks out and they, you know, put up boom, protect the marsh, protect people's you know, boats and stuff like that. And, you know, over this past Christmas, on Christmas Eve, there was an oil spill and it was like 30 degrees outside. And our oil spill folks went out on Christmas Eve and put out boom, and, you know, they protected the marshes and tried to contain that. And that goes a long way with building trust within communities. After Hurricane Ike, I was responsible for doing, or not responsible, I was the lead for marine debris and beach debris removal. And I went out with some folks from Sea Grant and we went to the communities and said, this is what we're going to do. So we're able to build trust by actually doing something. And that overcomes some of the fear of these other communities, but it's got to be, you've got to earn that trust, I think.
I think that I have a couple of things to say about this. From the master plan perspective, I think it was clear from what I said earlier that there are very few win-win-wins in the master plan. It recognizes that things are going to change, and that in order to do something to benefit kind of from the larger perspective, then there are some impacts associated with that, but which may or may not be considered mitigable. And we're just about to build. We have the money now. We have the permit. Pending litigation, build a $2 billion ecosystem restoration project. That even though there are millions of dollars set aside for mitigation of fishing impacts, many people in the industry are vehemently opposed to. At a public meeting the other night, the master plan team were accused of being murderers. There's clear kind of mistrust. It was actually pretty upsetting to many of the younger people on the team who haven't had that kind of dialogue in a public setting before. But on the positive side, and I think reaching out more to kind of the community engagement side, the state partnered with local nonprofits across the coast, funded by philanthropy, where they were able to rent spaces in communities. We met in church gyms and community centers, roundtable, provided food, had, you know, just talked to people about it really in a very open kind of dialogue. Got any questions? What do you think? What would you like to see kind of way? And the great thing about that was, even after years and years of these plans, and we saw hundreds of new faces at those meetings. We were able to kind of, you know, feel like we were hearing from and talking to and engaging with many new people across the coast who were interested in what was going on and interested in what it was going to mean to them. I think the other thing that helps us a lot is just understanding the systems that people are working in. You know, this very large coastal system, you know, the people who are sitting around the tables with people, you know, understand the coastal system. They're not, you know, they may live in Baton Rouge, they may live in in New Orleans, but they need to be able to pronounce the place names and kind of relate to, yeah, that bayou goes in that, you know, kind of understand the issues that the people are experiencing and relate to them. So we've had different kinds of experiences, but I think that kind of comes with the territory.
Yeah, definitely in our government, we have equity and engagement as some of our guiding principles. So we have been working with non-for-profit organizations and grassroots organizations like here in locally the Miami Climate Alliance, CLEO, you've heard her talking in the last panel, Panelists, and we're trying to really have high quality engagement. So 3 weeks ago, we have a climate town hall where we invited people to talk about our climate action strategy. And we heard them. And like you said, a lot of people feel that they have been ignored for a long time and that a lot of the issues that they have been bringing up to the governments or the local governments, they haven't provided solutions. And so we need to explain to them who can address their issue, right? Because like I said, Miami-Dade County, if it's the problem is in a city, we cannot provide the solution. So I think a lot of the issues is about education, how we can provide them with the tools. Like, you know, if you have a problem, just not ignore them, but said you need to reach so and so in the city and talk about this. There are other problems that definitely, even though we want to address, we cannot address right now. For example, in our community, we have a big issue surrounding our waste to energy plant. We produce a lot of garbage. We don't have landfills. We have to use the waste to energy plant. The community in Doral don't want the waste to energy plant there. They don't want it today. We cannot make those changes today. What are we going to do with the garbage? You know, so it's part of the education and telling them this are our constraints and how we can work together. The community wants to plan their own future. They don't want to be told what to do. And a lot of these organizations are also pushing for accountability frameworks, transparency. So I think there are a lot of gaps that we need to fill, and really we need to be available for the community and have meaningful engagement, not just to go and provide a presentation and opportunity for them to talk, but also tell them based on our conversation, this is the changes we did to our strategy, or this is how we are changing what we are doing, and we listen to you. But it's a problem that is going to take a while to fix, and definitely we are working on it, but we are not perfect. Go ahead.
I'll just really quickly add, I think every municipality needs to look at who are the nonprofit organizations out there and why are you afraid to engage them? And then the nonprofit organizations need to figure out how to, like I say this a lot as being the girl who yelled at the city when they were doing something wrong. And one of the things that you do when you're outside the building, you yell at somebody, you're yelling at the entire staff, the entire building. And when you praise them, you praise the mayor. You don't do that on purpose. That's not what you mean to do, but you don't praise the staff who actually write the stormwater management plan. And so our NGOs need to do their job of really recognizing the people doing the work as opposed to just the leader. So that's one thing I'll say, but I also do think that there are entire sectors that government can engage with better. I do a lot on those people facing homelessness in the Mobile area. There are gajillion service providers, but they don't talk to each other. The city can help with that. They can help figure out how to convene them, get them talking to each other, figure out who's got what gap, who's duplicating what services. And that's a role government can be playing that we need to. We're only going to be successful on a long-term resilience plan, a long-term sustainability plan, sea level rise, like all of the issues that are so important right here, if we figure out how to engage business sectors, churches, all these groups, and frankly, government has a really good ability to figure out who the key players are and be on a regular call or regular time with those guys.
Yeah, so I know the Texas General Land Office, I think, had a community technical community advisory committee during the resilience plan process post-Harvey. That's when I was there. And I think there are ways that we can engage community in the process. But I also think I've been to a lot of the public houses, open houses where you get people come in and provide feedback and input. And it feels like at that stage of the process, it's already drafted, it's already sort of there, and you're going to get reactions to that, right? And so there have been strategies to bring in people earlier in the stage at the beginning. But I also think this kind of both for a transition from community engagement to ownership. How can we have people taking ownership of pieces of the plan or pieces of the process so that they feel empowered by it and that it will actually benefit and behoove their issues and communities? So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. We have another question over here. Right, yeah.
This is really quick. I think it is very commendable to see like the interventions that are made in low-income communities when they don't have the capacity. But I can't help to keep thinking of, you know, how can they intervene from this themselves? And what are we doing to leave the tools behind to implement such that they don't need that constant intervention, that they themselves are the intervention?
I probably said it poorly because what we did gave them capacity, it built them up so that they are leading their communities themselves now. I think that the citizens of the city of Pritchard who've been facing the challenges with sewage treatment, we did a great job. Mobile Baykeeper did a great job in 2002, 3, 4. Worked for a really long time, but now that community has the capacity and the requirement to do it again because it's another new problem. And the same with the community organizations across Louisiana after Katrina who were ready and capable after the storms. So I think I didn't know they sent folks, but we had the Ford Foundation, we had group like the big, we had a lot of our low-income community leaders, people who became leaders, get training, and now they are leading their communities. So I hear you. It is sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes the food on the table becomes the priority, and so somebody who is on a trajectory to be able to really lead their community just can't. It has to be a deeper bench. I think that's a big piece of what we have to consistently do is create a deeper bench. It can't just be that one wonderful person. We got to have a lot of folks engaged with that.
Any other questions?
Maybe less of a question and more of a resource, right? For just everybody in this room to think about. When we think about vulnerable populations, just keep in mind that for every community in the United States, based on the census, there's community entitlement programs, right? There's specific fund source for this and a planning community needs assessment that's done on a 5-year basis that they have to look at and they have to engage with the community, specifically vulnerable populations. We're working on some of these now and we're building in resilient elements, right? We're building in programs that identify the vulnerable that need transportation options, right? We're helping to build out lists that normally were built out through like health and hospitals, like ad hoc, right? And so I think one of the things that y'all mentioned earlier too, we talked a little bit about NGOs and nonprofit groups and identifying those. This is also part of that process, right? So there's a process that exists that the NGOs are the nonprofits do these programs. They execute them directly with vulnerable populations based on the needs that are identified in these plans. And these dollars are just based on census numbers. So I just want to make sure the research team knows, right? So when we're thinking about regional systems and sustainability and how to like push this through, we don't want to reinvent wheels. We maybe just need to think about what wheels exist and making sure that they are communicating with each other, and that those resources that are being applied or those programs that are being developed are linked, right, with the EOCs or the emergency operations centers and the resilience plans, because there are already dollars there and they can be leveraged and utilized more effectively. And again, like, you know, we're in the process, we just, you know, did this and for a community in our parish in Louisiana, you know, we're identifying all the nonprofit organizations, the services that they provide. And when we develop programs, or we have them in mind, right? We're looking at what they provide. We're trying to make sure the programs that they can apply to provide services match, right? But then also trying to evolve them a little bit more so they're more resilient. And that's a push and a pull, right? And that's, I think, where we sort of need communication expertise, and you need to sort of work with people so that you're not doing it for them, you're doing it with them, to the benefit of all the different sort of sectors of society that we work with. So it's just something I just want to bring to the group's attention, because it is a resource for planning and for community development.
So we've got these, in Texas, we have what's called colonies. I didn't know what they were until I got to Texas. But they're very small communities. A lot of the folks are primarily agricultural employees. They're very at risk. What's a good way to put it? They're very poor communities. They don't have much infrastructure. And our last, that actually was that meeting that I was at, the county judge in Texas, county judge is the one who runs the county. She got up and she was talking about how these colonias needed water treatment. The water treatment facility that was serving the colonias of her county was built like 50 years ago and was nowhere near the capacity they needed. And she was talking about how they needed the water treatment facility to be brought up to speed. And, you know, she came up and said it was like a $20 million effort that would be needed. And I said, well, is that something that can be phased in? She said, no, this is something that's important. She kind of yelled at me. I said, well, they're not all grant funding have $20 million that they put is, you know, and then she realized what my question was, but she was very passionate about getting these colonias the assistance they needed. And that's what is needed. Somebody who understands the issue, that has the voice, and will speak out for these folks. So I don't know if I'm, again.
Did it get built? Did they get the 20 million?
No.
They got, it was identified as a tier 1 project.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm writing support letters all the time for these. And so we anticipate, yes, it will get funding.
I think that just seeing between what Tony just said and Alex's comment, it seems to me that you know, we have this, we're here to talk about sea level rise. We all know it's a challenge for people living on the coast, in urban areas, in rural areas. And I think what I'm hearing from Alex is, and this might be kind of paraphrasing a bit Alex here, but there's a lot of information and tools and money available in different programs. And the trouble is it's extremely difficult to navigate. A community at the coast may need a new water treatment plant. They may need some non-structural flood protection. They need some issues that, you know, some things that BRIC funding can do, when they've got FEMA here and they've got HUD here and they've got EPA here and they've got 39, and these different pots of money can be amalgamated in some instances and not amalgamated in other instances, and some of them need matching funds, and sometimes you can use the HUD money as matching funds for the other federal program. It's a complete nightmare. It's a complete nightmare. And you know, no wonder people on the ground. And frankly, this is something that you know, we're here in Florida, this is something that really the federal government needs to get their act together on, because it's just ridiculous.
A fun little fact for y'all is that staff participate in the FEMA national frameworks, where they're looking at adding resilience throughout the 5 major frameworks. And the big study that's publicly available, so I'm not being mean, had 31, if I'm not mistaken, 31 overlaps and duplications that needed to be studied. Essentially, FEMA has been building a body of work since 9/11, and then everything that happened in 2001, every big storm just got a new something. So there's a lot, and they know it. I give them great credit for recognizing that that is a problem that really requires those of us in government or leadership or wherever it is to continue to be a resource. It does not mean we don't, you know, I'm gonna certainly teach a person to fish and they'll fish for the rest of their lives. That's real and true. But when then the government creates another new something or other, you know, I mean, it's like getting a new fishing pole that's made of nanotechnology. Sorry to continue that theme. It's hard, and I think that is a role that government can and should be playing.
We have a couple minutes So we're great for lunch. No, we're getting hungry. Any other questions we haven't? Do you want? Yeah.
Yeah, I can ask. I think I can do without a microphone. I think small, bigger rooms than this. So, I guess one of the things I was wondering is, y'all were talking about, kind of building capacity and building the bench and communities. How do you do that with the demographic changes that so many of our, especially rural communities, are seeing? We have major issues with population aging, youth out migration, especially educated youth out migration. How do you do that amidst those demographic trends?
We're looking at, in the city of Mobile, we're a very old city, older than that one down the street from us that people like, and that thinks it's Mardi Gras. But it's old. We're older than we're the first. Anyway, and so, but Mobile has we this year officially, this last census, we are officially a majority minority community. We still have a white mayor who won 60-something%. He's doing great, but because he's really focused on demographics, he's really focused on, he calls it One Mobile. It's kind of our mission, is that everybody's at the table, whatever you look like, however you are, and consistently working to make sure that the right people are on his team to be able to be the ones to go into those communities. Poor, uneducated, wealthy, ruling class, whatever it is. He's got a whole full team who looks like the community, and that is crucial. And it's something that I don't think we think enough about at all. And I frankly hadn't thought about before I entered this building. Our leadership team in the city looks like the demographics of our community over and over again. It's really interesting. It's really wonderful. It doesn't happen everywhere, and that's what makes it hard. I assure you, the county across the way from Mobile Bay is not like that. God bless them, y'all. It's really pretty. But we've got a lot of work to do from that perspective, and where you have more rural folks being able to talk to the people where they are and meet the people where they are. Me walking into certain communities out there, I mean, it's like, you're so cute, thank you for being here, but no. And that can be a bunch of male leaders, or it can be, African-American community. It can be a bunch of different things. I don't look like them. They don't trust me, and building that trust takes real time. And the best way to build that trust is to start with the local community and the local leadership in the community. And if you get some of that trust, then it's okay for them to invite me to come to a meeting, and I can, but we need those leaders, and my mayor wants to make sure that those leaders are in our rooms and that they are given that kind of authority, responsibility, and connection to the decision makers. I think that's a big piece. We've got to really get folks connected to decision makers.
I went to a conference a couple of years ago, and University of Texas Marine Science Institute, but there's a college down in the very south part of Texas called UT-RGV, Rio Grande Valley. And it's a primarily Hispanic community, but they have a very active marine science program, and are able to get some really smart kids involved in it. And just, we need to keep those kids involved in resiliency in their community. And it's a great opportunity there. And there are kids that are, I can say kids because I'm really old, I guess, but there's an opportunity there.
Little students.
So, and some of them have become involved in some of the communities down there. So I recognize them in meetings. Hey, didn't you do a person? Yeah, so he was, involved with the community. So it is something that you got to encourage them, but there is an opportunity to do that.
Tim, what that makes me think of in terms of kind of the changing demographics of the communities is whether or not that's something that we accept, or whether or not that's something that we try to reverse, right? I live in Montague, you probably know where that is. My kids have college degrees, multiple, and they're not going to live in Montague. There's no way they're ever going to live in Montague. And so one reaction to this kind of changing demographics could be, from the state perspective, I'm thinking could be economic development. Well, we just need better jobs down the bayou, right? You know, my daughter's a chemical engineer. She needs to go to work. It's not going to happen. But and so what I have seen in Louisiana, and this is as part of this idea of the disconnect across different kind of parts of government, is the Economic Development Authority identifying places where they want to do economic development. And if you superimpose those areas where they're promoting economic development across the coast on a map of what the future coast looks like, there's a real disconnect, right? And so, and I would say that really we need to kind of help a community like that, but help them in the transition so that then the people that are there now are in the future in a good place. And that may not be the same place that they're in now.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, I was just about to end it. I think we're at time, right? 12:10. The worst part of being a moderator is having to end the conversation because I think we could talk all day long. There are so many things we weren't able to touch on, unfortunately, but thank you so much for all the panelists and for a great conversation. And I hope that we have more opportunities to stay in touch and stay connected and share stories, share case studies, share ideas about all these issues that we're all working on across the Gulf. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I guess, again, I just stress that the conversation is actually continuing. Of course, lunch should be an enabler. And then, of course, again, we will have the afternoon sessions. You know, everything is going to continue. I hope that they're enjoying this. And there are really intriguing and provoking questions and mind-blowing questions and comments, which make me want to say a couple of things about me, which I won't, because I don't want to be hated, because it's lunchtime. I know I took 3 minutes from you, so I'm interested. I give 5 minutes, so we're going to be back here in 1:15. So all those lost, I'm going to tax to the last session of the academic section, you know, this academic talks and the least important part of today's program. So please enjoy lunch ready and served.